additional
Sorry,
high
at all the
tech
buildings.
meeting space.
So they've been involved in the Army.
It says it's live, George, but I don't see anything else.
They are,
It's live?
they.
It says live on my
Private
phone
funding
here.
That's gonna allow, I guess.
I think we're good.
There are 3 people watching.
65, 35.
You're one of them, so.
That's right. Yeah, true.
65,
There are 2 people watching.
Big audience.
That's right.
And so they'll cover the 35% for the local government. But they are interested in reestablishing a fish run into
Is the sound on, George?
with a fish way. This is way up.
Can you check
Can you
it?
tell if it's on?
The,
They're talking
the
to-
mic indicators are going like they're supposed to too, so I'm assuming
Okay.
it's on.
There's, the only thing it's showing me is Winterberry's. It's not, the camera's not showing anything. It just says live. Yeah, it's not showing the actual meeting.
As soon as you move the structure, the show, like, the very next one.
There's certainly room for improvement.
Some of the dams that are in Old Town, they found that they had a wild run, from like 27 to like 800,000 in 1 year.
It says live. I don't know. The camera's not on.
One of the zinc benefits there is
Okay, George, I can now see me.
okay. Have a fish with lots of nutrients.
I can see clearly now, the camera's on.
Oh, you're showing your age. Hello?
Actually,
She's probably gonna get feedback.
There's a delay.
I hear
Yeah.
noise, so we're good.
Yeah, we are.
Okay, I can turn this off.
from the salmon, and yes, the bears are in the woods after the.
It is
is
quite a
delayed,
delay.
isn't
There is a
Holy
time delay,
cow.
that sucker.
It's almost a minute.
Evaluation, which
Yeah.
sounds like it's coming.
It picks up all
First
the
thing you
time.
want, you
Yeah,
can
right.
just, bleep
Let me
that
know
out.
if you, can you move
Yeah, well.
We had a delay when we were picking the 6-wing numbers. Just before. Just before.
That's right. It's good. Yeah, horse racing would be good.
Yeah.
Let's turn the volume down.
So how did your wife?
Oh.
Time?
How are you?
I'm good.
Before I did.
Would you sign my
That's what we-
petition to be on the, to be mayor of Durham?
Vince Music. 4 years before.
I signed yours.
4 years, okay.
Now she,
Do you have a pen?
Julia retired in June.
Good. Good.
Okay,
Wanted to
front page.
Get local
That's great.
input and hopefully support. I think that's, in the future, but this is.
Now every day is Saturday, 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 Saturday.
Okay, I think it's close enough, or it is 6:30, so we will begin the regular meeting of the Durham Planning Board. We have a quorum, we have our 5 members, and so if you will join me in the determination, oh wait, no, sorry, Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, number 3, the annual election of officers. Anybody want to run for chair?
I nominate John Talbot for chair.
Second.
Okay, I will then, I need to step aside, so Ms. Vice Chair, if you would say that it's been moved and seconded.
Yeah, it's been moved and seconded. Can
All-
you come back in now?
No. I can't, I guess I can't,
All
I know.
right,
Are you feel
all
free-
in favor, right?
Yes.
Okay. You're in.
Okay, I'm back.
You're back.
I abstained. George, I abstained. Okay, so the vice chair, and I will nominate Juliet Kaplinger.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, if you're in favor of that, please raise a hand. One abstention.
Okay.
4 and 1 abstention. Do we have any amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, I do, George, the way it's written, we can go ahead and do the town attorney. You know, when we get into that stuff?
Yes.
Okay, good. It's nothing personal, but we just want to get rid of you. So, there are no amendments to the agenda. Acceptance of meeting minutes or changes.
I have one change that I noticed. It's on page 9, and it was item 6, which it actually read, it was a motion made by John Talbot, It said to not deny the waiver request to allow the access road to remain gravel. It should have said to deny, which we, in my recollection.
It did,
it
'cause we
certainly
denied
was
it.
denied. We denied it. And a letter was sent to that applicant. But other than that correction, I didn't see any other issues.
Okay. Anybody else see any issues? George, do we need a vote on that change?
You could just vote with the amendment.
Okay. So do we, I need a motion to accept the meeting minutes with, as amended by Alan.
Second.
Move? Okay.
So moved.
So moved. And we had a second. So all in favor, raise a hand. Done. Okay, informational exchange on non-agenda items, town officials. Well, Mr. Roy, as a town official, do you have anything you want to say?
No?
George?
Just a reminder, there is going to be a workshop meeting in this room next Monday, the 13th. There'll be a focus group consisting of the representatives of the organizations that use these town facilities for public meeting rooms or other purposes. So that would be the fire station meeting room, the Eureka Center, and the town offices for conducting business. And the purpose of the focus group is to just solicit from the people and groups that are using these facilities what they see as the issues in terms of, are they meeting the town's needs and their needs as a group? What are the problems that they see? And then what goals would they have for the future of these facilities, which is being incorporated into a visioning process for the future of these town properties. Then the following Tuesday, the 21st, there will be kind of what they call a charrette style event over at the Eureka Center, where we'll have groups individually working on kind of get the feedback from the citizen survey that was done about these issues, and then the results of the focus group, and then try to have groups work, small groups work, to just compare notes and come up with what they think might be the future of these properties, just conceptually, nothing in detail. So that's those are the two events that are coming up. The focus group meeting next Monday is limited to the people that were invited, which are representatives of all those groups, and then there'll be a open community event the following Tuesday over at the Eureka Center.
Those are not televised, right?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Labarge?
What time is the Tuesday meeting?
I
The
think both of
21st?
them are at 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock. Okay, thank you.
And if we have to have any other meetings on what we're gonna talk about tonight, we'll talk about that later, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
then we will need them, and yes.
Okay.
Okay. Any other town official business? Residents. So public comment is taken this time. It's on issues that are not on the agenda, 3 to 4 minutes. So are there any comments on anything that's not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to non-residents. Any non-residents want to speak? Seeing none. We have no continuing business, no new business. The other business before us is planning board discussion of land use policy changes for next town meeting. The first one being contract. There's two potential articles. One is on contract zoning, and the other one then is on the standards. And this, if you remember, we had the town meeting, I guess last month, November. So this is kind of the follow-up on that. So kind of lay out where the process is, and Mr. Roy or somebody can correct me, two different articles. One is on contract zoning, which the select board has taken the lead on, but the town attorney is going to provide a presentation for us on that tonight. And then the other one is the standards. And so this is one of two. Expecting to not finish the standards this evening, I've reserved this hall for the 15th, which is a week from today, to continue on, maybe finish, but to continue on with the discussion on the standards. And the follow-up discussion on contract zoning will be with the select board. So tonight is to learn about contract zoning, and if we have any comments, to provide the select board that. I don't think it has been presented to the select board yet. So we get the first view of it, if you will. So, having said that, if the town attorney, whose name I don't know, will please come up and introduce yourself, an address, and who you're with.
I'm Kristen Collins.
Please come up here.
To the table?
Yeah, microphone.
Okay. Let me get my, here just in case I need it. Oh, Kristen Collins, nice to meet you. And I'm at the firm Freddie Flaherty. I've been the town attorney since the summer. And have been working with the select board and George on these issues about potential contract zoning. And so I think the purpose tonight is to go over contract zoning in general. And to start, I guess, my first question is, how much have you all discussed the concept of contract zoning? Out to this
I was
point?
gonna say minimally.
Minimum,
We've sort of been introduced to this, and I was somewhat remiss. You're not gonna go into details on the actual article. You're just gonna do an introduction to contract zoning.
Correct. I'm going to
Okay.
do a sort of a conceptual overview so that it's not total news to you when you see an actual draft. And I have prepared a draft, which I've now circulated to Joe to share with the select board prior to the workshop next week. And I think the idea is, if that's a successful workshop and something comes out of it, correct me if I'm wrong, George, but maybe that could be discussed on the 15th as well, although it'll still be kind of news to you, and who knows whether there will be more discussion to be done after that. Certainly there will be a hearing because it's an amendment to the land use ordinance, which requires a hearing by the planning board, even if it's the select board who initiated the amendment.
So they can't do their own public hearings.
They can't.
They
No.
can, but, okay.
They can do a public hearing for general public input, but it's not the statutory public hearing that you have to have in
gotcha.
order to change your zoning ordinance.
Okay,
Okay, so that always is done by the planning board, and that will be done here, both on these best standards and on this contract zoning. So to be scheduled, once everything is ready in an informed share with the public. So contract zoning in general, I am a big cheerleader for it. The reason being, I've seen it used quite successfully in a lot of towns to do some really great projects. Projects that end up with public benefit that you wouldn't have otherwise seen, but for the contract zoning, which is, a construct by which, yes, there's land use review, standards that apply to that land use review just like they would to anything else. But because the applicant is asking for some degree of flexibility, or because it's a certain type of development that maybe is more intensive, we, the town, have the ability to ask for more from them. So it's a tool by which a lot of oceanfront or lakefront communities have preserved public rights of access to the water, for instance. A big subdivision that has beachfront that you wouldn't otherwise get any public rights, you can sort of, through that process, demand those rights. A development that's going to create a lot of traffic, perhaps it's road improvements that they wouldn't have otherwise had to do under site plan review standards or conditional use standards. Maybe it's, they have an unusual demand on public infrastructure like water, so they're going to put in a water line that didn't exist. So contract zoning is provided for by statute in the zoning laws. And a lot of people, you might have heard the term spot zoning, for instance, that spot zoning is evil and wrong and illegal. It's actually not. All zoning has to be in accordance with a comprehensive plan. And that zoning could be on a single piece of property. That zoning could be, a big district. The thing that really matters under the law is that we have a comprehensive plan that supports the general use in the district. Or in contract zoning, coming down to the very specific piece of property in question. So once you have a framework for contract zoning in your ordinance, you're not mandated to have it, but it's something you can elect to put in an ordinance. You can use it as you wish. So that means that some towns have ordinances that say, we just have this one odd property that we have a big public interest in. we want to make sure it's developed in a certain way. So this piece of property has to be developed through contract zoning. So for instance, I represent the city of Belfast. They have that really great harbor walk. And they used contract zoning only on specific pieces of property on the harbor to make sure that that public harbor walk was protected and preserved and sort of developed as part of that by the developers of those properties. The other way you can use it is just, it's generally available. Anybody can come to town and propose contract zoning for a particular piece of property because the standards that are there don't fit them. So I'm seeing it used a lot for housing right now, for instance. I'm working on a project on behalf of a developer where they're doing a mobile home park expansion. The town needs affordable housing, but the lot widths, the lot frontages are too big under the ordinance to accommodate the kind of density they need in that kind of development. So they're using contract zoning to reduce those widths for that project. In exchange for that, under the contract, they get other, assurances for this community that there's going to be sidewalks and recreation areas and things like that. You have a question?
Yeah, my question is, do they or would we have a general contract zoning thing that could be applied to, obviously we're talking about battery storage here, but trailer parks or whatever it may be, or is that specific to trailer parks? I mean, they have something in existence now, contract zoning wise, or no?
Right, and in this community, for instance, with the mobile home park, they have a blanket contract zoning provision that anybody can make an application for any property, and they just pitch the case. And the planning board reviews it, the legislative body reviews it. At the end of the day, there's an agreement or not. And that agreement would slightly modify the standards that would otherwise apply.
So how would the contract zoning differ from asking for a waiver through the planning board?
So a waiver for the planning board is usually going to be, and I would have to look at our provisions to be exactly accurate about this, but it's going to be limited to situations where there's really an operational hardship that you can't meet the standard. Either it's inapplicable or, like it's unnecessary to build a cul-de-sac here because we don't intend further development at the end of the road or whatever it's going to be.
Okay.
It much more limited than contract zoning allows. So then the third way you can use contract zoning is as a mandate. So for instance, in Brunswick, I was very surprised, I'm the town attorney there too, and I was very surprised to realize that they didn't have any contract zoning provision in Brunswick, which for a pretty developed community is unusual. So they recently put in contract zoning, and they are using it in particular to limit the way in which, or the process by which certain types of development, particularly industrial, and I think one of the other ones is like renewable energy facilities, could be developed, recognizing that they're sometimes an extra draw on the community in terms of impacts and resources and things like that. So they have in their table of uses a mandate for those certain types of uses that they can come in by contract zoning only. So in Brunswick, it has both categories. Any old property owner can come in and ask to use contract zoning for their development, or in some cases it's actually mandated. And then, like I said, some communities for certain particular properties, they would require the process be used. So what I'm proposing here in the draft that you'll eventually see workshopped next week is going to be, it's available townwide for any parcel, for any development, subject to the process. Here, because we're a town meeting form of government, it ultimately gets approved by the voters. So it's a bit of a clunky process in a town that's not led by a council, but it's certainly a really democratic process, because the idea is supposed to be that the project has overall public benefit, and we're putting it out to the public to choose whether they want that thing or not. It's a lot of risk to the developer, right? As they go through this whole process of appearing before the planning board and the select board and developing this agreement, and then at the end of the day, it's totally up to a vote over which they have no control.
That's interesting. I'm thinking of, so someone comes in and they apply for the contract zoning, and it goes through the process, then the townspeople still have to vote approval,
Correct.
accept them, wow, okay.
Yep.
Can I ask a
So is-
question?
Yeah.
So your proposal right now is town-wide for any type of project,
Yes.
anywhere?
That it's available. Yeah.
Yeah, so if like, we're talking about BES right now
Mm.
and developing the standards for that, but what about another use? How do, like if someone comes in, is that when like a team would get together to develop the standards for whatever use that would be, if we already don't have it?
Yeah, so the planning board might recommend certain other categories of use in addition to BES that we think that contract zoning makes a lot of sense because it's just a kind of a scary or concerning type of development. We want input and control over it. And so the draft you'll see will have a couple of uses suggested as things where we could mandate contract zoning. That contract zoning, again, that's going to be an overlay over all the other processes and permits that they still have to do, site plan, everything else. But then the second part of your question was, sorry.
Yeah, like the specific use, whatever it is, like say it's, I don't know, something we don't have yet. Is there a team that comes together to put together those standards like we're doing right now? for
Yeah,
BES?
I mean, like we're doing for BES, if it's a use that we haven't even envisioned, it's not even on the chart yet.
Yeah.
We generally always have some flexibility, particularly for commercial and industrial developments, to put a moratorium on, like was done, to spend that time to develop standards and to have them apply to that use. But we don't have to do that necessarily with contract zoning. If that use is not listed as something that's currently allowed in the town, then they would have to come in and propose a development, and we'd have to consider, okay, is it going to be by contract zoning because it's something that's not otherwise allowed on that chart, or are we going to make it allowed on the chart through a moratorium, an ordinance development process, apply some standards to it, and then either you use contract zoning or not. So the one limitation in that kind of process that is the case today, based on some law changes last year, is if it were like a large-scale residential development, we can't do anything retroactive. With all these other types of development, commercial, industrial, we still have kind of carte blanche to apply standards retroactively up to 45 days after a project is even approved on a site plan. But with residential, they get rights under the ordinance that exists on the day they file the application. So if the development includes even one residential unit, they put in an application, even if that application isn't fully complete, they're vested at that point. So this process isn't necessarily as flexible for residential development. That said, someone's coming in with a large-scale residential development may find that Durham's lot sizes, for instance, are too large for them, and they need smaller lot sizes. Contract zoning being available, that's something that we might be able to work with them on and get an overall development that works better. That makes sense?
Okay.
It sounds like contract zoning could override some of the requirements that we already have in place for, like you had mentioned, reducing the lot size. And that's something that's already in our ordinance. And I would think that once, it's concerning to me. I wouldn't want that overriding all the hard work we put into developing the ordinances. The other part is, once someone has applied for contract zoning, what is the time frame that it would actually be presented to the townspeople to vote on that?
So it would take some time.
I would think so.
Let me just remind myself of the process I was working with. There's opportunity for, in what I've drafted, for combined hearings between the select board and planning board on this that helps streamline at least the process to get to town meeting. But the select board always has control over when and how things are presented to town meeting. So
Right.
let's say a developer comes in July and quickly negotiates a contract zoning agreement, the select board still may feel like we don't want to just have a special town meeting to consider this thing and have potentially 25 people show up. We're going to wait until the next spring town meeting.
Okay.
And that takes some time. And again, it's another huge risk to the developer on top of the risk that the people won't vote for it in the first place. So I think that you're not going to see a lot of developers using this process. In a town meeting town, there are too many unknowns. There's nothing worse for a developer than time delays and putting in all of the effort that it takes to get to the point of an agreement just to potentially have it shot down.
So the odds up front that that developer would probably know that they have to wait until our annual
Correct.
town meeting.
Yeah.
Right
So
up front.
I don't envision it getting used a lot, but your backstop to all of this is town meeting. And town meeting approved that ordinance as it sits today. If the planning board is against the modification because it hates the development, it doesn't see the benefit that overrides the restrictions that are already there, you vote against it. Which is not to say that the planning board can put the brakes on the whole process, but if the planning board has voted against recommending a contract zone, and then it goes to the voters with that recommendation, I think it has pretty poor chances.
Yes, I would think so.
Yeah. The other thing too is you still have the comprehensive plan, which I think you have a pretty solid comprehensive plan here, and thorough. And if it violates the comprehensive plan, meaning it's proposing an industrial development in an area that talks about its residential charms, I think that the planning board can still vote to find that it's not in conformity with the comprehensive plan. I think that the select board could still certainly be, even if they want it from a political standpoint, could be advised by council that it doesn't comply with the comprehensive plan. And, that would, in theory, put the brakes on the project too.
Sorry, one more thing kind of following up. The process. So say this is a large BES that comes in, we're developing the standards of what we're going to look at. But if it's typically like a site plan review, this could take months and months to go through that. That has to be completed before it goes to town, right? All of that. Is that?
Let's see, our draft.
And I know you're still working
Yeah,
details.
it's okay
so
if you don't have the, I was just.
if you're more
No, but I
comfortable
mean,
waiting for the
that's
select board.
that's an important question. The applicant could, at some risk, proceed on dual tracks, I think is the way I would.
Okay, dual of us reviewing the.
Right.
And then the
And then they're
town going-
pursuing the select board, planning board process for the contract zone. They could do it sort of in any order they want, but it doesn't,
Okay.
none
Yeah,
of this
okay,
precludes them
yeah.
from having to go through that process, but
It might
if
not be
it's the
smart.
type of large-scale development that typically is gonna come in requesting contract zoning, they are usually not gonna wanna spend all their engineering costs and attorney time and everything else to put that project
Got
through site plan review if there's this big unknown on the legislative thing
Got
hanging
it.
out there.
Understood, thank you.
Yep.
But we could say, large development, whatever it may be, we, the planning board, are not gonna hear you until the town approves your contract zoning for that particular effort, or?
I mean, I
is-
think you could look at it in concept. You certainly could not issue any final approval. You could issue an approval that's contingent and conditional on contract zoning approval. I think you could do that. But I think it would be better for everyone if they want to pursue a dual track to just go ahead and go through that process.
Okay.
Because it might reveal some things about the application that inform the contract zoning process too, right? But we can talk about that as we workshop it and what we think works best for you all and the select board in terms of the timing. It is certainly okay to say you can't submit a planning board application until you've been through the whole process and gotten your approval. We can have that in there.
Any other questions?
Brian had one.
There's always gonna be questions.
You have one?
Oh, I'm gonna go after Brian again.
Okay.
Can you explain the difference between contract zoning and overlay zones or floating overlay zones?
Yep. So an overlay zone is going to be, it can be parcel specific and just, kind of freckled all over town, or it can be a contiguous area for which special standards apply. And it could just be, this is an overlay zone that applies only to this particular use. And we're only going to allow it on, this tract, this parcel, these several parcels. And on those parcels, specific standards are going to apply that are probably more stringent than the rest. Or it could be less stringent if we're trying to promote a certain type of development, but different than what the underlying zone allows. And let's say we're doing all of this just for BES. There's only, one or two solid parcels in town where this kind of a project would work. Absolutely, you could use an overlay zone and say, we're gonna overlay zone these two parcels. This is the BES overlay zone, and only on these two parcels, you can do a BES subject to these standards. And those trump anything else to the contrary in the zoning ordinance. You could do it that way. What you lack in that process is the contract. So you lack the ability to have that flexible concept of, okay, you want this from us, what will you do for us in return?
Okay. And with an overlay or floating overlay, do you still have to go through the town meeting process?
You would have to just to put that overlay zone in place in the first place, but then those standards are there and apply to that parcel or that use regardless.
Okay. So it's, what can you do for us is the difference?
That's the real big distinction.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, and once you have contract zoning in place, like I have it proposed where it's available to any developer, then that is different from an overlay zone too, right? Because it applies throughout town. They just have to kind of come in and show you what they can offer you as the whole concept. And another reason why I'm suggesting, and again, this can be walked back, but the reason I'm suggesting it townwide is because Durham is kind of a funny town in some sense. You got a lot of land, you don't have a lot of tax base, and it's hard to balance the overall rural residential thing with the kind of commercial or industrial development that you might need to promote in order to sort of have that balance in that tax base. And so contract zoning is a way to sort of recognize that disconnect and find the projects that work for you rather than create a larger growth district or change zoning and lot sizes and things like that. So it gives that flexibility, and then it kind of helps you as Durham grows and changes over time, which is kind of hard to prevent as much as everyone might like to. At least you have more of a hand in it. At least
Just
in the
follow up
beginning.
on the, how much can you do for me? Is there, would we overstep our bounds?
I tend to think that the sky is the limit.
It is?
Yeah, because you are, your boundaries under the standards for contract zoning are, it's in the public interest. And so as long as you can make the case for whatever you're requesting being in the public interest, it's usually going to be about the physical development of the property, or physical development in general. So you couldn't, for instance, say, if you want to do this, you've got to pay us $1 million. That's just going to help offset our taxes. It's gonna be something that is related to the development, kind of a need that's caused by the development, and something that they can help offset in physical development sense. So, if it's a residential development, is it improved sidewalks between there and the school? Is it a new traffic light? Is it a crosswalk? For an industrial development, again, it would usually be things like, maybe it's fire protection equipment for a BES or a large solar development. In theory, I've seen boards struggle with this issue of geez, you know, the solar development is packed in, it's hard to reach. We just have to let it burn, but we have a narrow window around it to be able to fight fire and prevent it from spreading. So we need this particular type of, you know, ATV mounted sprayer. When you get to that point and, you know, you want to approve the application, but also you feel like you have this fire protection need, it's a bit uncomfortable through a regular old approval process and a condition to say, you got to buy this thing and give it to the fire department. But through contract zoning, that's totally par for the course.
Can we not offer or actually ask for a economic benefit on these things?
No, I would say not. Not because of anything that's in the statute, but I just think that that's not how contract zoning is intended to function.
Okay.
It's a planning process that's
Okay.
supposed to be about physical development, that kind of thing. I mean, I've not seen it litigated, so I would not recommend just give us a huge.
Yeah.
You know, let's say it was a college that wanted to locate here. You didn't have the standards, whatever they need, or it wasn't a use that's provided for. If they are not going to be paying taxes, but they're going to have a demand on services, that I think might be fair game. So we're going to request a pilot payment from you in lieu of taxes to help defray all of these public the kinds of things that you guys can consider under your land use standards, right?
Right, I was just gonna ask, sorry to interrupt you,
Yeah.
so like in other states, they do pilots, like for buses and for solar projects, or they do other like environmental benefits that can be in an economic
Yes.
value. We can do that in our ordinance, right?
I mean, you
Or-
can do it just through the contract zoning process. Again, all I really care about is there a nexus to the development? And is it a demand that's caused by the development? And if there's not a rational nexus, that's where I start to think like, that's a problem.
Yeah, so I mean,
We're just extorting cash from you, that's a
Yeah,
problem.
outside of contract zoning, could we put in like pilots? Could we put in these community benefits?
I mean, a pilot is never something that you can straight up mandate as a land use approval standard. The reason you see those pilots so much is because developers are super happy to offer them and it sort of greases the wheels. But it's not usually because there's a land use standard that's requiring it.
I think some states might have those, and yeah,
Yeah.
Maine's not one of them. Yeah,
Maine is
okay.
definitely not one of them, but even again, where you see these like, you know, big renewables developments, for instance.
Yeah,
You know, if they're paying a pilot, it is often because they are under some sort of land use structure where the public benefit or the public sort of draw on resources is being considered. And so they're offering up that pilots to sort of defray the burden that they're putting on the community.
yeah.
So maybe it's considered that way, but it's very rarely, in my experience, and certainly not in Maine, a mandate where you gotta pay to play.
Okay, thank you.
That said, I've seen developers do it successfully in some small towns and totally get what they want. Even where the property wasn't necessarily exempt to start with, you know.
Any other questions on the contract zoning?
John, could I make a couple of points that relate to it? Part of the reason why, and Kristen can correct me if I'm wrong, but part of the reason why you can say the sky's the limit on the negotiations is because this is entirely voluntary. This is not where you are requiring a developer from a regulatory standpoint to do certain uses or to do it in certain ways. So that kind of takes off the impetus of the developer being forced to do certain things. They are asking for this, and as a condition you're offering. You're offering to allow relief from the zoning restrictions in return for this. So that makes it a much better negotiating process for the town. And as a follow-up to that, I think it's important, the impetus for this was the prospect of a large-scale industrial battery energy storage system applying for a permit, and Kristen has given us opinion that under the current ordinance, that's a permitted use. Even within the shoreland zoning and resource protection, there are conditional use reviews that apply to those in those zones, but throughout most of the town, anywhere along the power line, the battery energy storage system, even on an industrial scale, if it's connected to the grid along the power line, would likely be considered in a permitted use as essential services. So that's what this does, is it gives the town an added layer of protection beyond the standards, the safety standards, to control where these things are located within the town. Because right now, as I said, they're permitted pretty much town-wide. And then the second part of that is also, as an extension of this in the future, your ordinance right now, because there's just been so many small businesses scattered across the town historically, lots of contractors, small businesses, you have your home-based business, but then you have lots of businesses that are not really meet the home-based limitations. And your ordinance pretty much allows commercial and light industrial anywhere in town. And so the only leverage you have from a regulatory standpoint are the conditional use criteria for those uses, which do apply. And you could, probably the one that's gonna be the most effective in controlling something like a large commercial development that's proposed or industrial is the scale. You can say this is out of scale with the neighboring farms and residential neighborhoods. However, again, if it's along a power line, that's the adjacent use, then it's gonna be hard to argue that, you know, a BES or something else does not match the scale. So the purpose of this is to give the town maximum control over the location of large developments, and this is an effective tool to accomplish that.
On that, can I just ask, for BES specifically, is the idea to just use contract zoning and that's it for the future, or are we kind of like using this as a interim step to possibly developing an ordinance?
The way I understand it is, it would be by contract zoning only, and that's the way it would stay.
Okay,
But because of the nature of the use and, you know, the desire to have further control over it.
okay.
The other thing I'll say about the conditional approval standards too is, as you know, they're really subjective. Because they're subjective and a little bit vague, they're subject to challenge. And so if you do something like find that the BES or whatever development it is out of scale, you're always subject to challenge that your subjective determination wasn't right, or that the underlying standard itself was too vague to apply, and therefore illegal or unconstitutional. And so, you know, it does provide a little bit more armor to say, we can apply whatever standards we want in some sense to this particular development. So for BES, for instance, the way this is going to be structured is, as you know, you're working on standards that would apply no matter what. So those standards are going to be the land use approval standards by which the BES gets developed. And then on top of that, they have to use the contract zoning process. So they will, you know, make whatever proposal they're going to make about where this gets located, public benefits, whatever they're going to offer. And once they get through that process, most likely that's the trajectory they use, they then come in for a relatively standard land use approval from you, but now you've got these use-specific standards that you'd apply because it's a BES.
And we're still talking BES batteries larger than a typical house would need,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
But we'd have to probably figure out that size,
I
but,
think we've done that, I think we have it in the packet.
yes,
It's up for discussion,
Yeah,
what
yeah, yeah.
size. So-
okay, thank you.
So we can have that discussion going forward.
Oh, and one more thing, sorry. The moratorium is in place right now. Is the idea that if this contract zoning gets approved, we wait till the moratorium's lifted, or maybe extend, whatever, and then this thing would take,
Right.
yeah,
So the moratorium's going to last however long it lasts.
Yeah.
It's either going to expire or it's going to be renewed, depending on how this all goes. In theory, one could keep the moratorium, which is an ordinance, but pass contract zoning
yeah,
and those amendments, and someone could still come in and say, notwithstanding the moratorium, we want to use the contract zoning process and develop this project.
so the moratorium would be null.
Yeah, I mean, if given that there's a moratorium, they would be able to get the public support for that project through.
Yeah.
And by that point, I think it's well likely that our process will be complete, moratorium will be lifted, we have standards we're comfortable with, project can go forward if it passes the contract zone.
Any other questions? I do have, go ahead.
This is probably outside of your scope and your contract, but I'm not a fan of just limiting this to BES. Why wouldn't we apply this to commercial or residential developments as well?
I mean, I think you'd want to find a size or a particular type of commercial or industrial development that you're trying to apply it to. If it was just like someone wants to put in a gas station, do we really want to have them go through a 2-year process potentially to get there? If someone wants to put in a small inn or Airbnb or a B&B, do we want them to have to go through that process? It's really intended to be, I'll actually.
But did you not, maybe I misunderstood you, did you not say that the way, and I realize it hasn't been presented yet,
Yep.
so I don't want to lock you into this, but the way it's sort of going now, it would be open, it would not be specifically limited to BES. It
would
could
be
be for lead mining
available.
or
Yep.
could be available for other
to,
things.
to any developer for any type of development. But I thought what you were getting at is, could we mandate that it be used for any commercial or industrial development?
Yeah, like I noticed Scarborough has an ordinance, a contract zoning ordinance specific to residential development. Cumberland has one specific to commercial development. And I know the select board has asked that we strictly look at BES or BES, I guess is what it is. And I think that's a mistake. I think that we should need to keep it open to all development.
Well, so that's the idea, is once you have the process in place and the ordinance, it's available as a tool to require by mandate for, maybe it's the new development that comes in that we haven't planned for, maybe it's a certain category of use. Again, I wouldn't apply it to any old commercial or industrial use, and I would suspect that those ordinances, I'm not familiar with either of them, are, if it's a certain scale of residential development or a certain type of commercial development or certain location maybe. I've never seen one where it's just like all commercial or industrial development has to use that process.
I would
But
suspect
keep in
that-
mind too that those, Cumberland, is Cumberland a council town or a select board town? Not sure. But
Council.
their council, yeah. So in a council type government, a lot more streamlined too. So you're putting a lot less burden on the developer.
So I think what we're saying is the BES will be mandated, contract
Best would be
zoning.
mandated.
That's the only way we could do it.
Yep.
But other types of development, we do have ordinances for, but they could also do contract zoning if they wanted. It's not a mandate.
Correct.
Like BES.
So if you could,
That's-
and if you could mobilize quickly enough with a development that is unforeseen, you could mandate that process as a quick,
Yeah.
shoot, the old process used to be moratorium, take a whole bunch of time to develop standards. And then once that gate is lifted, they can possibly come in. Contract zoning would be a way to, now we don't necessarily have to do that because it's just this one development we're concerned about. We're gonna make them do contract zoning. And
But the framework for contract zoning, assuming it passes the town, is there.
it is.
That could be used, so we don't have to come back in and approve contract zoning at the town. We then have to, as a town, decide what other, a lead mine, a tanning facility,
Yeah.
1,000 home subdivision, whatever it may be, we're gonna apply it to that. But the basic framework is there. And then
Yes.
we can, if something comes in and we need to put a moratorium in, but we don't have to go back through let's approve the framework for contract zoning.
Yep, and, let's say the select board next week after workshopping this says, we're not ready for it to apply townwide, to be available for anybody for any use. We wanna dip our toes into the contract zoning water by mandating it only for these couple of uses. See how it goes, see if we like the process. Absolutely, we could do that. All it would take is one line that says, contract zoning is available where so indicated on the table of uses. And then it's, it's there, it's available for a particular type of use. From time to time, we might add it in as a mandate.
in the pack, just for information, in the package that was on our package rather, there is a change to the table of uses that specifically refers to both, I guess, both solar, and you probably prepared it. so-
Yeah,
but-
large solar.
So it would now, if it's approved, would require solar farms to go of a certain size, to go through contract zoning, and BES of a certain size to do that. So
Correct.
if the table of use is approved, so that we're kind of
Yep.
already starting with that.
So actually, are we considering solar as a mandated large-scale
Yeah,
solar?
that, the amendment that was just referenced to that table as it sits today
Uh-huh.
with the proposal would mandate 1.5 million of solar projects to use contract zoning as well.
Okay.
Yeah, that was in the packet.
Yeah, so is this, you're gonna be presenting this to the select board next week, is it open to the public? Okay. Okay.
Public comments on it though.
Yeah, that'll be up to
With
the
the select
select board
board.
about how much they are gonna open it up to the public.
Okay.
Right.
I'm sure if planning board members are there, you'll listen to some feedback.
I wouldn't put a lot of money on that. We don't let them talk, so,
Emphasis on the word some, I guess.
You asked Joe at the beginning.
I did, but not, anyway.
Oh,
What you
okay.
offering?
Before, let me pull my foot out of my mouth and say, are there any other questions?
I may need to do the same thing, depending on how next week goes.
Yes. Are there any other questions on this? I think it's early stages, so the select board sees it next Tuesday. It is either televised or you can show up in person, I'm sure, whether verbally or otherwise. But right now, I think as a town, we need to see what's gonna be proposed. And that's still to come, so.
And if you wanna do some independent research between now and then, there's not a lot of distinction between these contract zoning ordinances. You can take a look around at what you find. And what I would also suggest that you do some Googling for are the agreements themselves in various towns. So once they get approved, they're actually an amendment to the zoning ordinance. It's sort of like, for this parcel, the ordinance is amended according to this agreement. So they're usually appended on to the land use ordinance, either figuratively or actually. And so you can sometimes find them in codified ordinances in the bigger towns, sort of tacked on usually to the very end of the code. Or if you just Google, you can find some too. So you can see the kind of things that people offer up as public benefits, for instance.
Any other questions on contract zoning or?
I do. Regarding the table, is that the right time to talk about the
I
table?
think it's probably better to do it down the road. I mean, because I don't know that it's fair that the select board hasn't seen it, but I guess the general question would be, okay.
Are
I
we
would
talking
think-
about this afterwards, right? Standards and stuff, or no?
Well, I would think we would be
During-
recommending to the board that we want this included in the table.
Yeah, it is in their draft, so is that what you were gonna ask?
Yeah,
Ask your
just-
question.
The question is, should we replace the solar energy, let me look at this. Solar energy systems with renewable energy systems?
You mean to cover battery too?
No, to cover
Windmills?
thermo.
Windmills.
Exactly.
Oh.
Windmills, there's a bipartisan infrastructure law that's out there right now where there's $300 million that's assessed to scientists and engineers looking at
To
wind
do-
farms and thermal.
Let's hold
So I
that,
just
those
think
kind
it
of
should be
details.
renewable energy
Yeah,
instead of
let's,
solar.
let's hold
I
that,
like that.
we'll discuss that rather than.
Not a bad idea. The other one I'd throw in there is biogas.
Hmm.
Those.
Does that not fall under renewable energy?
It could, depending on
Okay.
how we define it, but for instance, in Brunswick, that was the trigger for contract zoning with biogas facility out on the landing.
John, I think that discussion does more apply to the contract zoning than it does to the standards.
Okay,
If you were gonna loop in those renewable energy types into the requirement for contract zoning, then that's not the standards, it's the use.
do we want to go ahead and?
Yes.
And include this discussion now with the town attorney here?
Sure.
This is where I usually make a wise ass comment about who's paying her bill, but I will not do that.
We all are.
But please, I'm also on the budget committee, so.
You know, Jerry and I are talking about a
conflict of
retainer agreement, which I'll make a plug for, because that lets me stay here however long you want, for the same price.
Well, that's
So,
nice
So
to
is-
know.
when you're thinking about that on the budget committee.
See, it is what comes to, so did everybody look at the
Yes.
table of uses that has been, the draft proposed table of uses? So I'm not sure what the discussion, so right now, there's a change for recommended change for solar, and then also battery energy systems. So do we make it for, just one, is what, I think the question is, do we just make it, land use, renewable energy versus solar and, battery energy systems, write it that way? Is
So-
that what the discussion is?
Can I actually just say something? I didn't realize solar was being pulled into this mandated, contract zoning. When we got here because batteries, right, we've heard of a lot of issues with battery projects. And the concern with figuring out what those standards are. We already put out an ordinance and got it approved for solar. So, how do I say this? Do we feel like it's necessary to add solar in right now? Like, or can we just focus on battery right now? We've got the solar ordinance. Maybe look at adding solar into a contract zoning mandate, possibly after battery. Like, what was the impetus to adding solar into this contract zoning mandate?
Somebody, I mean, since we
Let
were
me
part of
take
the
a first
discussion.
crack at it. You may recall during the public process on solar, one of the issues that came up, and the Conservation Commission was working on looking across town where they would be appropriate, where they wouldn't be appropriate. And again, I think we're all talking about the large-scale projects, not a small-scale
Well, we're
project.
talking 1.5 megs, right?
Yeah, and so, and you know, where that threshold is cut off, to require contract zoning is certainly subject to discussion and decision.
Okay.
Right now, it's proposed at 1 megawatt.
Or one?
Or
Yeah,
one.
one.
Oh, wow, okay.
So,
It's greater than
you know,
or
that
equal
may
to.
be too high or too low, depending on your perspective. And the other point I would make is that during the testimony that came in during that public process, there were people in the industry that were saying, the solar standards that we adopted, they're too stringent for small projects, and they're not stringent enough for large projects. And so that was all part of that process that led to the Conservation Commission, which had been working on it before, trying to decide where to locate or prohibit these. And contract zoning would be much easier and more effective in controlling. And the other point I would make is, I don't know if you saw that Green Maine had a very big political crisis and land use crisis when someone proposed a 500-acre solar farm.
We have a limit, don't we, in our ordinance for solar?
No.
We didn't put a limit in there?
No.
Okay,
Oh,
so,
the only limit is whether they have to do a conditional use and site plan review and apply all those standards. So there's no limit on size currently in the ordinance.
okay. I think maybe this is a separate topic than for right now, but I would like to continue this maybe with the Conservation Commission and the Planning Board to talk about keeping solar in here, especially at 1 megawatt and above. That's a pretty, it's small.
Well, I think
size
it's, yeah, the
project, but-
Conservation Commission can weigh in on their own, but what's before us now is to give, and again, this is for, if correct me if I'm wrong, the draft table of use is ours to work on or the select
Well,
board?
the key to that is triggering that contract zoning will be required for those.
Okay.
And the contract zoning is really what you're discussing at this point.
Yeah, so I don't think this is the time to do that.
That's fine.
So any other questions that we need to discuss with the town attorney? And your time is well worth
Thank you.
our dime.
I do have a definition for renewable energy generating facility that I've used that would include, I'll read it to you just real quick, a facility for generating electrical energy from wind, solar, or geothermal means or through the burning of biomass or other renewable resources. And then we could tack on to that, it includes solar facilities and BESS, you know, as defined, so that they're just a category that comes in there, and then we could have on the table of uses that broader definition of renewable energy generating facility. That might be a way to tackle that.
Fantastic. No, I think there are other options other than solar to where BESS could be used. And I think renewables would be a better use of the term rather than solar only.
Okay,
All right, thank you.
I'm not
Uh,
asking again
If you-
about any other questions.
If you have any
so-
other questions, you know, filtered through George, I think they can be brought to that workshop, and I can try to touch on them as part of everything I go through with the board.
Super, thank you very much.
All
It's been very
right.
helpful.
It was good meeting you.
Have a good night, you too.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's done. And again, the lead on that is starting, I think, next Tuesday for the select board, or is the select board. So we're done with 9A, and now on to the standards for BESS. And George, I think we start with, so this is the one that we're responsible for to get it ready in the near or midterm, whatever future. So George has done, I think, a good job of putting some standards together based on other towns, based on discussions and feedback that we've had on this thing. So George, I think you've got a presentation that you'd like to do.
Yes, and I did include it in the packets, but I prepared it for tonight for us all to look at and discuss. Yeah, let me make a couple of introductory points that I think are important. The first is that this is really an extension of the work that we did with the Conservation Commission on solar energy systems, because this came up during that whole process, and the committees really pretty much determined that it was really important to get those solar standards in the ordinance, and this was new. We had not done research on these types of facilities, so, but my view is that this is really an extension of the work that the town has done over the last 2 years on solar energy systems and energy systems. The second point I would make is that the picture in the slide there is the project that was just approved. It's actually almost been 2 years now, but it's under construction right now in Gorham, and that is 5 acres of battery energy storage units, and that I think is 175 megawatts, and that is under construction right now. When it went to the Gorham Planning Board, based on my review of their public records, the only standards that the planning board had to use to apply to that were site plan review standards, which are very similar to yours, and so they pretty much had no leeway on a lot of the issues. And then the other thing we've learned over the last year that we've been looking at this is that across the country, particularly in New York, there have been real issues with fire safety on these facilities. So those standards have been rapidly developing in response to problems that they've had with these, and so what I did was basically we had looked at together at the New York Governor's report on what needs to be in BESS ordinances to make these things safe and workable. So we've incorporated that information, and in my review of numerous ordinances using the town's in-process codification resource, the one in Carver, Massachusetts, that I used as a template seemed to reflect those New York task force recommendations for the safety aspects in terms of monitoring, suppression, emergency operations systems. So that ordinance of all the ones I looked at seemed to jump out as this one is ahead of the game, and that was the one that I chose to start with. The other caveat to all this is that I am not anywhere near an expert on these issues, and the town has not funded hiring a consultant to do this work, so I'm providing my best limited ability product to you, and certainly there's a lot of room for looking at the details, thresholds, those sorts of things, as well as some of the details in terms of codes. I have run this by the fire chief and the code officer, and I've had some input from them on it. So that's kind of the background for how we got to this point here tonight. So with that, I'm just gonna have just a few slides here, and then we can open it up for your discussion. So again, the key findings bringing us up to this point was, I mentioned the Gorham project. The town attorney, as I said earlier, on contract zoning has advised us that utility scale BESS meets the definition of essential services and is a permitted use throughout the rural, residential, and agricultural district, and is a conditional use in the resource protection and the shoreline zoning. And as I've told you in the past, and I think Kristen, the town attorney, indicated to you tonight, your ability to withstand a legal challenge under your conditional use criteria is not a very strong position compared to having specific standards like we talked about. Then I also mentioned in my opening comments how there are significant safety, fire safety, noise, and environmental concerns based on the track record across the country of these things, and you have no regulations to address those issues. And just as a reminder, you just discussed tonight, there's a moratorium currently in effect. It was enacted at the special town meeting on November 19th, and it extends for 6 months, and it can be extended by the select board for another 6 months. And the select board back in December directed the town attorney to draft the amendments for contract zoning that you talked about just a few minutes ago, and they've asked the planning board to help prepare these best performance standards.
Sure,
So,
just
yeah.
one quick note, I think on your second last bullet there.
Yeah.
We're actually under, I think you said it, but you said 6 month extension, it's actually 6 month moratorium. We're under a 12-month moratorium with the possibility of a 6 month extension.
No, I don't think that's accurate.
Oh, okay,
Six.
so
It's a
6 months.
6 month
all time.
moratorium
6 and 6,
with
yeah.
a 6 month
Mea
extension,
culpa. So it's a total of 12.
approvable by the select board without going back to the town meeting vote,
Okay.
for a
I stand
total of 1
corrected.
year. And that's limited by statute. You really can't go beyond that. Okay, so just to get everybody on the same page of what these things are, this drawing or graphic shows relative sizes. So the green box there is a typical residential unit that measures approximately 4 feet by 2.5 feet wide. We've talked about Teslas. So that's pretty. That would not be regulated by what we're talking about, other than some of the electrical safety codes, fire safety codes. And then the gray box is more of a mid-sized commercial. That also would really not be subject to contract zoning. Then the large orange, it represents the approximate size of pretty much a storage container sized box that contains, and that could contain up to 1 megawatt of capacity within that, or megawatt hour, whatever the proper terminology is. So there's a picture of one in terms of, this is very typical of the type of units that there are. And just to get a sense of the 1 megawatt, I did a little bit of research and found that the average in my own electric bill, you average 30 kilowatt hours a day for $900 a month. The typical size of these units, these boxes, are about 300 plus square feet. And one of those will, according to the research I did, generate 1 megawatt hours of capacity. And that translates to being able to power 33 homes for 1 day. So just to give you a sense of that. So this current contract zoning piece of this is going to limit anything beyond that would have to go to a contract zone. So that's that residential scale. And as I said, most systems would be able to go in without any of this. So as far as the standards are concerned, this diagram that I found really identifies what the codes are that apply to different parts of it. So up on the upper left with the icon of a power line, you have those codes apply to the connections to the grid. And then you have the overall installation to the right of that, with certain codes that apply to the overall installation. And then there are codes that apply to the fire and gas detection requirements, systems, the fire explosion suppression codes that are referenced. And then the individual battery racks and the battery packs within them. They all have to meet certain UL and other standards. The communication system, because that's been a real big deal in terms of New York's experience and others, is that it's critical that when there is overheating in these things, the system needs to notify the operators and immediately shut it down. And each one of these individually should have that type of technology and ability. And then there is the power conversion system that again has a UL certification that has to be done. So what I did was I took this diagram and took the Carver model and basically plugged these in, as well as the main building code and other codes, as opposed to the Massachusetts, which is what the template was made from. So I did circulate the draft to you, and we've already been getting some feedback on the draft. I have been circulating it to people in the industry, asking for feedback, and we've gotten some other public input as well.
Sorry, George, what did you circulate?
I circulated the draft
The one that you sent
standards.
us?
That's right,
Okay.
draft standards, and we've gotten feedback on it, which, depending on when you decide to have your public input information session, we'll basically make that part of the background information for that discussion.
And for those who are listening at home, all of this is on the website.
Yes, that presentation is on the website, as well as the draft and some other background documents.
Okay.
When can we talk about this stuff?
Right, as
Right
soon
now.
as George is done.
Okay, okay.
I'm done.
So what I would like to do now is start the discussion with the planning board, and hence the no public input this evening, but go through the draft that George has provided, which, like he said, is very similar to what we've done with solar, and he's looked at other things. Get our comments together, and then it's probably as good a time as any. I would like to, I don't think we get through this, we don't finish this certainly by tonight. So the next meeting I propose is a week from today, 6:30 here, to continue the discussion, and at that point, George will take our recommended or ideas from this evening, make some changes, put it back up on the website, and then have what I would call public input at that meeting next Tuesday. And then take that public input and see where we stand at the end of the day on the 15th. So now is the time, I think, and I guess in my mind, the best way to do this is rather jump all over the document, kind of go through the 8 or 9 pages, whatever it is there, and see what comments we have on the individual sections. So this would be the opportunity to do that.
Can I just ask some process questions, John?
Sure.
On this? Do we need standards developed by the time a developer comes in and says they want to do contract zoning for a BES? Do we need to have these standards developed at that time? We probably should, right?
Yeah, my
I know that.
recommendation-
So once this 12 months is over, right, that should be our goal,
Or before.
or before, is have that ready.
Well, the way I would see it, and more to follow after the select board's meeting, they would file requesting a contract zoning, if they have a location, so on and so forth. That would get approved at a time, so let's just assume that contract zoning passes and these standards pass. So they would come in, they would file for contract zoning, the town would approve, it's an assumption the town would approve that particular project, that contract zoning, and then the planning board would have the authority to approve the site plan. So the town is approving the framework for contract zoning, the town is approving the standards that we're gonna talk about here shortly, And then down the road, the town would approve, and these are all assumptions, contract zoning for that particular project. And then it would come back to the planning board. If they were going parallel, we would be working on working them through the standards.
And when would the town vote?
The town, it's at the town meeting.
Town meeting?
But after we're done reviewing, or before we're done and after the select board is done? When does that meeting happen?
Well, it's whatever the select board writes it up as, so but you gotta approve contract zoning first before we can approve I'm gonna talk about the
Yes,
project now.
yes.
The individual project.
Yeah, so we need to approve the overall contract zoning thing for our
Ye-
town.
yes.
That's one, right, and then,
We need to approve the standards.
yes, yes.
And then, so those two things are approved, I come in with my, my best, and I resubmit for a contract zoning, and, that is negotiated with whatever process that we come up with, and then the town meeting approves that contract zoning for parcel A. And if they wanna gamble and they wanna come in and start working on the standards with us, then they can do that. If they're trying to save time at the risk of doing everything we require them in planning and engineering and everything else, but we cannot approve the project site plan until the contract zoning for that particular project is approved.
And just to separate the discussion of any project, just looking at the ordinances alone, the town currently has no standards to apply. It's currently a permitted use. So to me, it's critical that regardless of what happens with the contract zoning, the town needs to put standards into place before the moratorium
Yes, 100%.
expires.
100%.
Now, the town attorney has suggested that this will address the safety problems, but it won't address the scale problems or the location problems, which could have a big impact on the town, not just the specific project, but the area. And so, to me, although they're talking about contract zoning, actually, the way we're looking at putting it on the town meeting warrant right now is to have the battery energy standards first, I think, and then the discussion of the contract zoning. So irrespective of what happens with contract zoning,
Yeah.
the town will have at least that much protection.
Which is smart, it's very smart. So can I add another question? So now we're considering putting solar as a mandated contract zoning. So we're right now focused on BESS, but who's focusing on solar? When are we doing that?
The way it's being proposed to the select board is this thing that was in our packet of the tables of use.
Yep,
That will be considered along with I guess it's a separate deal, but that is another change to the ordinance. And the only thing that involves solar is whether or not a project of a certain size go to contract zoning. Because as George said, my bias is here, right now, as long as they meet our standards, they can put a solar project anywhere.
right, but what I'm saying is right now we're working on standards for BESS. Where are the standards for solar? Are we just gonna,
They're the same, we're not changing the standards for solar.
okay, so we're gonna look to our ordinance.
You're gonna
Yes.
continue to apply all the standards to solar that are currently in the ordinance. But what
Okay.
this is gonna do is set a scale limit that anything over
Okay.
1 megawatt or whatever you decide on
Okay.
will only be allowed by contract zone.
Got it, okay, so we already have,
Solar
BESS
standards
and
don't
solar.
change.
got it.
Right
Okay, so
now,
we're
maybe
sticking
more.
with- Okay. That's helpful. I still
Oh.
don't quite understand maybe you all do, the process of approving contract zoning for a project and us going through the standards and site plan or whatever.
Well, hopefully the standards
don't-
and the contract zoning mechanisms will all be in place whenever a project comes. And so then the first step in the process would be to go through the contract zoning process. And then if that gets approved, then go through the site plan review process or conditional use, and that's where these standards would be applied.
But what if it's denied? Can we deny it, the
The-
site plan?
If it doesn't meet these safety standards,
Yeah,
yes.
after it's been approved through contract zoning.
Even though it's approved by contract zoning,
Okay.
you'll still be able to
Okay.
deny it if it does not meet the performance standards.
Thank you.
Does that answer the process question?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, so going back to the standards and starting that discussion, are there any, just kind of go through them, the purpose, I don't know how much we may not need to discuss any of these, like 5.71, but are there any questions on purpose?
Has the Alan Plummer, our CEO, chimed in on any of this? Or
Yeah,
do
what
we
I
go
looked at
codes?
with him in particular was the electrical aspects, and I think it's important for everybody to understand that the code officer, his primary review is of residential development. If there's anything commercial, it goes to the state inspectors. So he's not really up to speed on commercial, much less something of this type and scale. So again, town does not have any consultants involved in this because we don't have the resources, but the code officer is not really able to provide input on these electrical code standards that only apply to battery energy storage systems.
He's completely off the hook.
Uh,
Our CEO,
Well, in terms of
from
what?
any review, any.
He
making sure
has
that
no,
they're
he has no
complied with-
capacity to do that review. He doesn't have the qualifications of the training.
Are we talking the standards, or are we talking a project?
I think
I
he
think
has
you're
to do the
talking
building permit,
standards.
right?
Yeah, most
I
of
mean,
what
that's
he
my question, you're talking about
applies
review of the
is
standards?
I mean, if he's gonna issue, who will issue the building permit?
for one of these.
Hmm.
After it goes through the whole process, including
Yeah.
the peer review of all the electrical stuff
Then
on this
he will.
project, you'll have a consultant at that point because the developer will pay for it. So you'll be able to, under the peer review system, hire a consultant to look at every aspect of that and make sure that it meets those codes. And then the code officer, when they come time to construction, he'll call in the state inspectors and they'll go through, make sure it's done according to the approved plans.
Okay. Okay, so, moving on, applicability, 5.7.2. And I will start off, I do have a couple of questions. It was just confusing to me, George. You list different types of batteries and the capacity of greater than 70 or 30, whatever. At this stage, we haven't really said that it doesn't apply to what I would call the household / Tesla batteries, whatever you want to call it. Is that an issue? And then the other one is, it covers 4 types of batteries. You know, sodium, I think, is a relatively new one. Should we put in there some, and other technologies that could come up? don't
I
know
think
what it
number
might be.
six is intended to address that. Other battery technologies.
So can I
Well-
ask, I'm so
Well,
sorry.
let me finish with my question. But the way I read that, George, it says it's are not subject to this section. So other battery technologies with a capacity greater than, so that do not meet the threshold are not subject to it. I guess I want to say they should be.
Right, but it's saying that if they do not exceed those capacities, then they're not subject to it, which does allow small scale.
No, okay, I got you on that
I
one.
think.
That answers my first
I think
question.
that's, yeah.
But how do we, so that if somebody comes up with a
New technology.
new technology, sodium's relatively new, should we put some kind of caveat in there that, rather than have to go back to the town to change this piece?
But that covers it under number 6, doesn't it? Because it's specifically saying other battery technologies.
That do not, the way George, I think, just explained it, is that 6 covers what I call the Tesla batteries, or the home car use.
Yeah, that one we should really look carefully at. But I don't know that you can say, and any other technology that comes along,
Batteries.
probably will have to amend the ordinance.
So if somebody comes in with a gold battery, they then have to wait to go back, we have to go back to the town to get that approved.
Potentially, I mean, these are across the country, the ones that are really being used, and only a few of these actually are, like, lithium ion is the big one.
Okay, I would just like us to
Yeah, in
consider.
terms of the technology and the, you know, the effectiveness and costs,
In 2025, that's true,
yeah.
but in 2030, it may not be true.
Yeah.
I'm with you here. Can I ask, where do we
Oh,
get,
thank
where do we get these?
Carver, Massachusetts, which
Carver?
came out of
Yeah.
research all across the country.
Like recently?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wonder, like, it's so specific, right? Like, and things are changing so often. Is there any other way that we could?
This is trying to catch them all.
Yeah, I know, but like,
It doesn't catch gold or platinum
So
or,
this, I think 6 really leaves us open, because if someone comes out with a new battery technology tomorrow that is not listed in one of these, we're saying any other battery technology that is not listed in 1 through 5, you can put it into your heart's content. Is the
no.
way 6 reads to me.
when,
To me, it reads,
Are
that
allowed by right in all zoning districts.
it says
if
it's not
they're-
subject to this section.
are allowed.
And are allowed.
I guess I would like that, I don't think 6 says that, but that's. what
Yeah,
I'd
I
like.
think there's some problems with 6 and we need
The
to.
wording.
If you would, yeah,
The
I mean,
wording.
we can, if George is gonna take a look at it for our next meeting.
Well, no, so what about, why don't you say 10 kilowatts and above, regardless of the technology?
Well, it's confusing that and contradictory where you have above 10 kilowatt hours that meet the threshold capacities, that do not meet the threshold capacities or above. I'm not sure exactly what that means, so let me look
If you
at
would
that.
play with 6 before, then that's,
Yeah.
we're gonna have another opportunity
That's
to look
something
at
we need
that.
to look more closely at.
Okay.
Okay, any others on point 2?
That was A, right?
That was,
I think you want to talk about B, right? The
that was
variables.
A6, George, 5.7.2,
Oh,
A6.
yeah. But what I'm saying is, you're gonna go on, you said section 2, I think you want to talk about 2B, correct?
Yeah. I
Which
think
is the tiers, the
that
tier
is
system.
B.
Okay, well, I've asked if there's any questions about that, I don't have any, does anybody else have any?
Well, I'd like to look further into what the tiers talk about before we get into, but if, maybe we could come back to B, George? If that's all right.
I think it's
Or should I
good
just-
to just get it on the table now.
Okay, let's look at.
So basically, if it's half a megawatt hour, then basically it doesn't have to meet the contract zoning or those sorts of things. And in terms of some of the site plan review standards, so anything less than half a megawatt is basically not subject to all of the decommissioning and all of that stuff that's in here.
And not subject to the mandated contract zoning.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
And I probably confused you by saying contract zoning. This has nothing to do with contract zoning.
Well, but if contract zoning does pass, this is gonna be mandated, except for tier
Right, but
one.
these thresholds won't apply to contract zoning. These will only apply to the systems that are approved under contract zoning or as permitted uses if contract zoning doesn't fly. Okay? So, just set the contract zoning aside for a minute and think about, okay, so just what applies here as you go through this whole draft is similar to the solar. If they're gonna propose a solar energy system, they have to have buffering, they have to have fencing, they have to have all these things. This says, like somebody has a small commercial, they don't have to put in, 50-foot buffers and 100-foot setbacks unless it's commercial. So the tier 1 is small, it's relatively small scale. And it doesn't have to meet all the decommissioning plans and all of that stuff. Once you get above that into the tier 2 and the tier 3, then you get into a lot of these safety issues and fencing and all of those considerations that are laid out, decommissioning plan and everything else that's in here. So the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 is like the solar. Does it require a conditional use, site plan review? That's what this is intended to apply.
And there's not many differences between tier 2 and tier 3.
Yeah,
Right.
That's correct. I think there's probably greater requirements for tier 3, but we can look at as we
Okay,
go through it.
okay.
So what you'll see down through here is you'll see tier 2 and tier 3 pretty consistently through here.
Yeah, they're like combined.
Yeah, they're kind of combined.
Yeah.
Okay, 5.7.3, general requirements. Anybody have any comments after you review on any of these things?
George, has all this been reviewed by the fire chief?
He's
I
been
think
looking
George
at it,
said
yes.
Thought he did.
He has been.
But we would ask him, he and codes, to take a look at it after any
One of the
changes that are
issues that
made.
he has raised, and if he's not the only one, is, is the proposed road width and surfacing appropriate? Should there be more substantial to support the weight of the loads of their vehicles? So that's something he's raised.
Okay. And they would look at any changes we make
Yeah.
going forward.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the access road width, I would agree that that might need to be wider. 12 feet.
Yeah, I think what this is designed to say, what do they need to build and service this thing, compared to what does the fire department need
Yeah,
to protect it?
yeah.
This
But
is
we can
more-
require
Yeah,
more.
So did Chief give you 16 foot or 20, did he give you?
he hasn't given me that yet, no.
So we need that.
We should look
If we get
for-
that before next
Get
Tuesday.
specifications for what he needs for a road to be able to service this.
And then the other part of that, an all-weather surface, I guess my thought would be that that should be built to a town standard. Just because I realize that there's not gonna be a lot of traffic on it, but when the traffic is going out there, this is a major deal. So whatever the fire department needs to get there.
Right.
So, a dirt road or stone road that's not maintained, I would just say, we should make it be maintained to town standards,
Yeah.
which is our
Whatever
argument
whatever
for
the fire department
subdivisions.
needs.
Yeah,
And then I think maybe in those standards, we talk about like turnarounds, hammerheads and things like that, probably? Or do we need to specify that in here?
We may, we'll talk to the fire
Okay.
chief.
Yeah.
In the past, we've talked about capacity and whether or not our fire department could service any of these facilities if there was an issue. And we also talked earlier about scale, developing scales of these facilities. So if it becomes out of scale for our fire department, who would we ask for recommendations on, specific to roadways? Like if they have outriggers, for instance.
That's
on
where the
Appalachian.
contract zoning is helpful, because the select board, the planning board, as you're going through the contract zoning, if someone's proposing a big scale project like Gorham, you can require them to submit a consulting escrow, and you can hire whatever experts you need to review their plans. Not to develop their plans, but to review their plans, to make sure that whether it's the fire department capacity, there are fire officials. I watched John, you clued us into a seminar in Massachusetts where the guy from the National Fire Protection Association came in and really did a great presentation on how to work with local fire departments. And there's lots of information. The chief is looking at some of that. How do local first responders, what do they need to know about these things, and what equipment and systems do they need to properly protect them? So that contract zoning piece is helpful on that. But even if it doesn't pass and you end up with the standards, you still get a peer review escrow. And if you need to hire an expert to evaluate the fire safety plan for this thing, if a project is proposed, you'll have that resource available to you. Either way.
Okay. Thanks,
Uh,
George.
just comments still on that paragraph E. In the solar thing, instead of Durham Fire Department lock, we call it a Knox box.
Yeah,
Can we
there's
just
some,
put
still
Knox
some
box down there?
terminology things here, yeah.
And then
I noticed that too.
access to all four sides of each enclosure should be provided where practical. I think it should be required. I mean, I think the fire department should be able to get to all four sides, or if it's a circle or whatever, but not, not where practical.
It might depend, because if you look at the, going back to the Gorham project. So you see that basically, within the project itself, they're gonna be, you know, depending on what the subbase is for all of this area, fire trucks, if they can get in there, would be able to, and they're gonna need to get in there to access the individual units that might be problematic. So, again, what we should do is talk to the fire chief on that issue as well, just to see what his needs are and make sure that his department has the access that we need.
Yeah, I don't understand why, like this plan is pretty funky. Why would you have trees?
Buffering. That's what that is about.
Yeah, we have a discussion, we're gonna get to that in a bit here.
I agree, like clearance, there should be almost just clearance. It's gonna be hard to buffer these things, but we could buffer from further out. Like, it should be cleared.
Okay,
let's sorry.
we're kind of jumping around here. We talk about buffering, you know, down the road, so I'd like to stay on track. So my question, you keep mentioning the chief. Is it possible can we request the chief be here at some point?
He would have come tonight, except that he anticipated you were gonna be spending quite a bit of time on contract zoning. So he'll
Okay.
certainly be available for the 15th.
Yeah, I mean, if we written the stuff we discussed,
Yep.
I mean, he's very good about emailing and doing other stuff, so I know he's busy and I don't wanna
And I'll
just.
report to him what we have discussed
Okay,
tonight.
if you get his feedback, so I'm
Yep.
trying to get to.
Well, I think one thing you did say there on E, when it said it should be provided, I think it must be provided when practical.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't even, I dropped the must, when practical. I mean, I just, they have to be able to get to these things.
Yeah.
And I don't want it open to some kind of definition of, you know, put the ladder up and spray on it or something. Okay, any other things? So moving on to permitting requirements for tier 1, I mean, it's basically just, anybody questions on that, that's basically, I keep calling it the Tesla battery, but, you know, the car battery, whatever it may be.
And it would actually be one of those boxes half that size.
Yep. So that one, any comments on it?
The utility connection one, for solar, we did give it to the developer's discretion. Well, no, I shouldn't say that, sorry. The utility's discretion on whether or not the equipment was above ground or underground. We did say,
You're jumping ahead of us.
oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're on permitting
Oh my
requirements.
God, I'm ahead of you, that's
5.74.
weird. Okay, sorry.
I just try to keep from bouncing around too much to keep it going. So, okay, so I gather there's nothing on point 4, point 5, 5 points. Now,
So, okay, because there's no permitting requirements for tier 1 anyways. So anywho, yes, tier 2 and 3, yeah, A, utility connections, like I was saying, for solar, we said we wanted them, we preferred them to be underground.
Yeah, and this language says, unless topography and other conditions of the site is verified by the
And
town's
utility-
consulting engineer and the utility require it to be above ground.
Okay,
Same- kinda
perfect.
same-
Yep,
Same
yep.
language.
Yep, okay, great, thank you.
signage? I mean, is that good on utility connection,
Yes,
signage?
yep.
So this basically requires at the project, the safety signage that's not covered in the regular sign standards.
Yeah.
Lighting?
Same treatment as for solar?
Any questions, comments? Vegetation and tree cutting, Juliet.
Yeah,
Is there anything that, under that ventilation and tree cutting, is there anything that describes regular maintenance of that? I mean, it sounds like we talk about it initially, then we don't talk about it again.
Maintenance of what?
Vegetation and tree cutting.
Yeah, I think I pasted in some of the language from
Look in G,
the solar.
the same, whatever we're on, 7 point whatever, on G,
Screening visibility,
page 24 of the package.
Yeah, I'm looking at it.
Screening and visibility.
Yeah, I took the provisions for that from our current solar and put that into here.
Okay.
Juliet, you had a question about not,
well, no, I read it through. So we're saying 30 feet? That should be plenty.
That's the clearance from
Yeah.
these things, right?
Yep.
That's pretty much the standard, as I understand it,
Yeah.
industry standard. For
It's
safe-
pretty high, but I think 30 is, it might be safer, I don't know, but,
Well, one of my great concerns is, one of the discussions we always have is maintaining the rural character.
right.
And so in my mind, there needs to be a good buffer to these things. Because wherever they're gonna, I mean, they're big and noisy and so on
If
and so
they're
forth.
visible.
So there's two things we're talking about. We're talking about buffer, we're talking about clearing of trees around it. Those are two separate things. In here, we say 30 feet shall be cleared of veg. So that's just talking about the clearance. Then we can talk about buffering.
There's a thing.
Yeah, so remember, these have a 100-foot setback, so if you think about it, if somebody would put this along the road, so they got a 100-foot setback, they got a requirement for a 50-foot buffer, and they've got to have a requirement for 30 feet from the units themselves. So they might have 30 feet from the units, then the fence, outside the fence, they have 50 feet of buffering. By the time you get out to the road, or maybe closer to the road, you know, they're gonna have to fit all that within there, within that 100 feet.
So under D, we don't talk about buffering yet, right?
No, it comes up,
Right.
you're right, I'm sorry.
No, I just want to make sure I wasn't missing something.
No.
So yeah, I'm just saying the 30 feet, I think, you know, is a lot. So if there's a battery that someone wants to put in the woods, they're going to be clearing quite a bit of trees. So,
That's
but
for-
if that's what
for
we're,
fire
if
safety.
that's what we're hearing from folks, then,
Yeah.
okay. All right.
Kind of going back a little bit on, I wrote it down next to, we never talk about height of structures. I don't think.
No.
We did with
Height of-
solar, we had
there's height of
50
fencing and height of buffering.
Yeah, but should we talk about the height of the structure?
What is
Well-
the typical,
Okay, so there's two different ways these things are done. One is to, like this, these units are like 9 feet tall. But sometimes they're
Stack.
put inside buildings. I don't know that they stack them.
you can stack them.
You can?
You can stack them.
But in any case, they're typically done inside enclosed buildings, like a lot of the, like Cousins Island has some of these, inside one of their old buildings that they're not using, I think, so.
Well, I'm not sure Gorham is, and I know Rumford is, neither one of theirs are inside buildings.
No, but they're no more than 9 feet high.
Not, so do we want to set a 9-foot or 10-foot?
Height limit?
I don't know about that.
I mean, what's the right, with, solar is 15, I'm not saying 9's right.
Can you go back?
But
to
if
your
they
image
stack
with
'em,
the
we're-
guy standing there?
Yeah,
What is that?
I think that was 9 feet.
But they can be taller than that. Do we have a problem with the height of them?
I have a problem with seeing them.
Oh,
I mean, if you stack two 9-foot containers, that's 18 feet. And I'm not sure some containers, I think
Well,
are maybe more than 9 feet.
Well, then why don't we just say they have to be, if we're concerned with the
Oh.
visual, then that's how we mitigate, is they have to be screened. If someone wants to propose a 20-foot thing, but they can propose screening,
They're gonna come in with a 20-foot tree?
Yeah,
or
that's
maybe
my-
no, maybe it's already existing, it's already screened.
Yeah, if it's got a forested
Well, then
buffer.
you'd have to say something like, you know, where's the effect of, cannot be visible from, and that may be in there. But I think,
In the other ordinances, they talk about the underlying principal height restrictions in that area for the
Which are
batteries.
typically 30 foot.
So whatever
For
we have-
structures, we'd like
yeah,
35
for-
feet.
okay, we're not talking about a house, though. We're
Yeah.
talking about, you know, these things are butt ugly. I mean, I don't know how to say it nicer than that. These things are ugly.
So maybe we increase the setback from the road to a mile and limit the development to an acre.
It's possible, you know, I mean, I'm not sure about limiting the, I mean, in my mind, depending upon where you put it, you know, if you want to maintain the rural character, and I recognize that's unachievable, you know, that's, in a perfect world, that's probably unachievable. But I am concerned about two containers stacked up being visible from the road.
Why don't we just like, they need to be they can't be
Visible
visible.
from the road?
Yeah, they can't be yeah.
Visible
for-
or adjoining properties?
From, yeah, yeah.
I'm okay with that. They'd have to, in my mind, they would have to put some kind of, George, you know, I forgot, but you know, you get somebody to draw, you put the height of the building, you draw an angle off that.
Visual impact analysis.
Thank
VIA.
So, you know,
I can't remember, somebody gave us one recently, but.
that's my, I'm not trying to, you know, stop these or whatever, but depending upon where they put them, the potential is, because we talk about Gorham, we talk about Rumford, those are industrial parks.
Right.
You know, next to one of them in Rumford is a natural gas power plant. The other one is in, right next to the paper plant, paper mill and a dam. Gorham's, if you look at the picture, it's an industrial park. We don't have that. So that is a concern I have, and how do we, if I'm driving down Talbot Road, I don't necessarily want to see these things.
Okay, maybe a mile's a stretch, so how about a half a mile off the road? And still limit it to an acre in overall size.
I'm not sure we want to limit it to an acre. They're bigger than that, I think. I'm not sure an acre works or a mile. I'm just trying to that's an option if that's the way we want to go. I'm trying to come up with something to say, you know, maybe you can't stack it. If it's 9 feet, you know, this is what you're gonna have.
But wouldn't you address
That's a
it?
5 acre site we just saw on there, it's pretty big.
Well, I think even the ones in Rumford weren't that big, but they were probably an acre plus
Let's
cleared
just-
and everything else.
Let's let the developer worry about it and come to us with a plan. Let's just say they have to be screened. They can't be visible from the road.
You got it
or,
under,
From adjoining property, I'm fine with that.
Joining properties, yeah.
Well, if they decide to put it next to somebody's, I don't know that they would, but if there's somebody's house, or if you put it in, because one of the other comments I've got down the road is, we don't, okay, right now it's agricultural, but somebody their kid wants to live, you know, on that property, they now have this next to them. And I'm a big fan of buyer beware, don't get me wrong, but there is that,
okay, well, we're gonna go in this order by order. We had been talking about vegetation
okay?
and tree cutting, and we jumped ahead. We didn't look at setbacks, we didn't
Wait,
look at
wait,
fencing.
we're still there.
Well, no,
We're
then-
still
then-
at D.
But give me,
Right?
give me a second. Then you get into screening and visibility. This is what you've been talking about.
Yes.
So I would think that if you want to address it and fine tune that, you would do it under that item.
Under which one?
Under
Under screening and visibility?
Under G when we get there, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, E, I asked, okay, let me start over this. Are there any comments on setbacks?
Yeah, no, I'm good there.
I'm looking around, any comments on the
Fencing.
setback?
Okay.
Then takes us to F, fencing requirements. And while others are thinking, the only thing, George, is on the solar, we talked about, I think it was 6 inches at the bottom to let animals traverse the site. Groundhogs, whatever.
So they can dig underneath.
Yeah. Hey, I'm perfectly happy for all of Durham's gun books to go to a best site, but
I don't know.
we did it for solar.
I know
What's the
we did,
difference?
but.
Yeah, I think there's a fundamental difference between solar and these things, because this is like an industrial yard. It's not a field, and the solar
Yeah,
There's
there's
gonna
not
be a
gonna
big
be.
base
completely
underneath.
vegetated.
Okay, is that
Think
the
about where we're
consensus?
asking to
Yeah, I
site
think-
it. It could be in a wildlife habitat.
Right, that goes back to the contract zoning. So
Yeah.
you'll be looking at those aspects, environmental aspects of it as part of the comprehensive plan review, the contract zoning review.
I got, but how do they
And,
know?
and in that review, if it was, you could make them do 2 separate pads, and then have a wildlife corridor between them. That's negotiable.
My only thought about, you know, someday when we're all dead and somebody comes in and nobody's ever thought about wildlife movements before. I mean, it's not a big deal to me. I'm fine with not putting anything there. I just was comparing it to solar and it was there for solar. If the consensus is we don't need to put it in there, then I'm okay with that too.
Yeah, I don't think we should say anything about it.
Is that consensus?
No, I don't think it hurts to put it in there,
To leave
that
a,
should be considered.
to leave a buffer?
Or clearance,
The
ground
same type of
clearance.
fencing that we put around, we're requiring around solar.
So we've required an ag fence around solar, right?
And I
Did
think
we-
it was a 6-inch.
It was.
With a,
bottom.
with a gap at the bottom.
Yeah, there's a
6-inch
it is a
gap.
6, I looked at today, it is a 6
I
inch.
was thinking about an ag fence for these, but I don't know if we should. You know, they're made of wood, right? So I think we're gonna
Yeah,
have to
this
stick
is
with a
probably
regular.
gonna need, this is a high,
Yeah, and then the gap, like, there's no reason wildlife, if it's in a wildlife area, like you were saying, we could provide a corridor, but we don't want, there's no reason animals should be in this area. There's no benefit for them in there at all, versus a solar field that could have, you know, agricultural species growing in there and grass, you know, they can,
So we can limit these
They can
to an
frolic.
acre in size?
you keep going back to that
Well, yeah,
acre.
because we're not saying how large this could
Well,
be, it could be as big as a solar.
An acre's pretty big for a battery system, to tell you the truth.
Well,
An
that
acre
one's,
is
that
a-
one's 5
Yes,
acres.
but this is like,
I got
this
that.
isn't like,
I hear you, well, let's, I think we get there somewhere, on
it's all on
size.
the table.
Yeah, so, I'm moving, so it sounds like,
why don't we just not mention it and then,
I'm
like,
fine
if
with
they,
that. The
if
animals?
they propose it and it makes sense, sure.
I'm
We
fine
can
with
consider
that.
it.
Then I think we're moving from F to G, screening and visibility. I think we talked about that, and this, I think, is a, you know, do we put a max height on it?
So we're saying a vegetative buffer shall be required around the battery system consisting of a landscape strip at least 50 feet wide around the entire perimeter, except for places that have an equivalent existing buffer.
Correct.
And we're also saying 8 feet above ground level, where that's 9.5.
Right, so you might see the tops of them. I don't think the intent here, either for solar, is that they have to be completely screened from public views. You want to mitigate that view impact.
Other thoughts?
I mean, if those are 9 feet, do you want to change that view to 10 feet, the 8 feet to 10? You're talking about bringing in vegetation that is certainly mature.
Yeah, or you know, within a certain number of years or whatever.
Yeah, just to be clear, typically you do not install 10-foot buffers.
10 foot tall.
Yeah, it requires, just for the health of the plants, you're gonna, usually what they do is they put it in a mixture of like 6 foot, 3 foot, and then it grows over time. They grow about a foot a year, so any buffering you do is gonna take some time to develop to be effective.
What do we have for solar for the width of the buffered strip?
50 feet.
We have 50 feet for solar. All right.
In solar, we talked about a landscape, and I think in this one, a landscape architect doing the screening and visibility design, landscape buffer design.
Oh. Yeah, we should,
I think that was in there for solar,
It was.
and it should be,
Be a good
Thank
idea.
you.
Impact analysis.
but no more comments.
Right.
Well, that would be consistent with solo, which would be good.
Yeah, that's, I've been trying to, in many ways, be as consistent with solar as I can.
Yeah, part of the benefit of that to the developer is that you get a landscape architect come in, look at all the different view shapes, like they do with the towers, they put up balloons and stuff for those. And they can provide the board with an argument to say, no buffers needed, because it's not really.
Yeah, I mean,
It
if there's-
doesn't have a view impact.
If somebody wants to come in and say, hey, there's trees there, I don't need a buffer, then the landscape architect, or he should say they're gonna put in 6
Or
foot,
you don't have to buffer from the power line.
or, yes, or something like that.
okay. And then
So landscape architect, you're gonna make an addition to
Yeah, I'm
that?
gonna look again at that.
Any other questions on screening and visibility?
No, I like what you added at the end, as far as the, when a buffer is not required based on results of a view analysis, or, you know, working with the adjacent landowner, yada, yada, yada. I like that part.
Noise. The 45, 55 and 45 come out of our ordinance. They're the,
And solar?
no, just our noise ordinance.
So that's what we have for solar then too,
It's
right?
for
Should be.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Batteries, that's what this is.
Let me back up just a second, George. I'm sorry, I did have a question on that. The verbiage you have here is requirement limiting any increase to be less than 55 decibels. Should it not say 50, not an increase? So if it's now 40, or are we saying it's 0 and it can't go above 55?
I think this language is intended to say it can't go above 55.
Okay, that's what it should say.
Yeah.
Not an
And the
in.
good thing about that is if right now the ambient, what they call the ambient is 30, it can't go another 55 on top of that. I think
This
that's-
says they can. This doesn't go to
No,
85.
it says,
Limiting
At
any
the property
increase.
line.
any
To be less than
increase
increase.
has to meet the limitations of section, that's in
So I would just get rid of increase.
Section 5.20, inside section 5.20 sets the limits at 55 and 45.
But the next sentence that says limiting any increase, I would just get rid of any increase, because we don't want somebody to think that it's 30 now and you can go to 85.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't agree with that interpretation, but I think we need to clarify that.
Let me win one tonight, George.
I'm with you on this one, John. I,
There we go.
I think that says, I think that says you can add 55 to whatever it currently is.
Okay, so we can just strike out,
Get rid of increase.
sure that it complies. Yeah, okay.
Batteries? Any comments on batteries? Seeing none, J, decommission.
Sorry, just the topic of it, should we just say storage or something? Instead of just like storage of batteries or, I don't know, failed batteries or something?
It says failed battery.
No, I know, but,
The kind of heading part?
yeah,
of
the
it?
heading.
Yeah, battery storage.
Yeah, yeah, just because this entire thing is about batteries.
Gotcha.
Any other battery comments?
What's a module?
It's relating to a solar, but maybe it has something to do with the battery?
If it, I would think, George may know better than I do, but is it,
Yeah, I think.
if there's multiple
module,
batteries in the
like a
pack?
tray. I think that's those
Pack.
trays that go into those big units.
Okay.
They've got like, I don't know, how many thousand cells in each one or something like that.
Yeah, maybe, that sounds great.
So once the battery fails, the module more than likely fails too.
I think so. I don't think they keep, or they could,
They gotta-
either they replace it.
Right.
Moving on to decommissioning plan.
Mhm. This is probably similar to what the solar we had in for solar, the decom plan.
It's less number of days. At solar's, I forget what it is. This only gives them 20 days, which I'm fine with.
To notify?
Yep, they have to notify the code officer within 20 days.
So what happens if there's a violation of that? If they
Yes.
did not notify the code officer within the 20 days, there should be a penalty.
Well,
I
there's a
believe there
decom
should
bond
be.
required, right? I wonder if.
There is, but
Yeah.
I mean,
If they violate the ordinance, it's like any other or violation, you take legal action. And assess penalties as part of that process.
Are we arbitrarily assessing penalties, or do we have specific dollar amounts that we apply to that?
The select board, when it goes to court, can get up to whatever the statutory limits are
Okay.
for land use violations.
Oh, yeah, there's a Juliet K.
Yeah. Okay, great, thank you, yep.
are we good on decommissioning plan? And I think, I couldn't find it, but I think there are, I read somewhere where the state now has rules about decommissioning that at the state level. Did I dream that?
Maybe
For,
part of the
Agreement about
recommendation,
staging.
maybe that document that John Simino sent.
It might have been there today, but
Yeah.
that was the question. I
They're still
asked.
trying to develop model ordinance.
Okay. So if there's no state rules, then I didn't, whichever one's the tougher one. So that is, so we're moving on then to K, which is the funding of it. My question there is, talk about it while I go to the restroom, inflation.
yeah,
Are the words strong enough to say that if this is a 20-year life cycle, how do we account for 20 years of inflation?
Well, it says continuously maintain a fund.
In an amount determined by the town.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if continuously covers inflation, and what is the time period for continuously
There
maintained?
might have been some language in the solar on that we
There
could,
was.
yeah, I think there's escalator in there.
yeah.
Yeah,
It was every 5 years, I think.
yeah, and I would agree with that.
Yeah.
we'll
Because
just
these
add
can be
that.
25 plus years.
Right.
Who knows?
Right
Double.
above that in 8, where they say a listing of any contingencies for removing an intact operational energy storage system. So we're asking them to provide us with a list of contingencies, which I'm assuming is monetary contingencies.
Mhm.
So you have that list in hand for what those values are,
Oh, yeah.
which would relate to K.
Yes. Yeah, they have to provide the decom plan, which includes the decom estimate,
Yeah.
which should include 2% escalation or whatever.
Mhm.
But yeah, maybe refer to the solar. I think we did talk about it in there. Should we wait till John gets back?
No, you're the VP, you take right over.
All right,
We'll
let's
just move
keep
right through
going.
this. We'll have it all done by the time he
Let's
gets
keep
back.
going. Probably he'll be so happy.
I'm stacking the chairs now.
So just to ride him when he comes back in, offer a motion to adjourn.
I like that.
Maybe he's watching. in
Yeah,
the-
you need to do that.
I might just turn the lights off and leave.
Okay, H. Anyone have any questions on that? 3, a 1 or 3 line. Those are two different things.
Where are you?
It's 5.7.
H3,
6A, are you on?
H3,
You talk about 1 3-line electrical diagram?
yeah.
In the draft, it's section 5.76.
Oh, I'm sorry.
A.
I apologize, guys. So we're done.
I move to adjourn.
Just kidding.
It's not April 1st, so I don't know what.
Sorry, guys, I skipped L. Do we need to talk about that proof of liability insurance?
Standard verbiage.
I think so, yeah.
So it says, in the amount and type generally acceptable in the industry. Who confirms what's, was it
Your peer review
$1
consultant,
million, $5 million?
or peer review consultant can address that. And any other issues that you need qualified opinions.
A lot of weight on that consent.
Don't let me forget to discuss peer review, but, okay, are we good on insurance?
I think we have.
Site plan application.
So yeah, the 1 or 3, what do we have for solar? Same thing? Or we required a 3 line, didn't we? No?
Out, yeah.
Yes? Yeah, I think we did.
3-line,
Yeah, so I think we should,
so delimitate 1.
yeah, and just say 3 line.
Any other questions? Moving on to D or E, the safety data sheets, large scale fire test data.
Yeah.
A lot of this came out of that New York
Yeah.
experience.
Yep.
And I would trust Chief. I mean, I do know Chief has called like people he knew in Massachusetts and others have had best systems to see what they're doing and what's working for them. So
Yep.
commissioning, go ahead.
No, I was just, which one?
Commissioning plan.
Yeah.
My question there is who approves it? And then who approves the commissioning plan? And then a couple of places that, the inspection by a main licensed professional engineer. Do we care? Is it the developers? Is it, our guy on a, escrow, or how are we doing that? Or is
I
it,
think this puts burden on the applicant to give that certification.
okay,
Yeah, right. I
And you
agree.
can peer review it.
I'm good with that. Anything on fire safety compliance plan, O&M manual, or I, depending on the location?
Um, The O&M manual, do we know who that goes to? Should the CEO have a copy? Should the fire department have a copy? And is it a hard copy, or is it a PDF? Is it a flash drive? Who owns that?
Good questions. Who
Well,
should,
it's, the intent of it is to have it be for the people that are operating the system.
gotcha, but
Operation
it,
and maintenance. And you will have it as part of your record for the town staff and officials to look at and impose if they're not following it
yeah, so I
in
mean,
enforcement.
it's not hard to make copies in any of the forms. Should we require them, because it's someplace, and I've lost track of it, we do require certain things to go to codes, fire, and town manager. Should this be the codes guy that gets a copy of it, the O&M manual,
Copies to code and fire.
then fire? And I don't know, does it matter? You can maybe ask them if it's, problem with paper copies is they end up on a bookshelf somewhere, and so do discs, I suppose, but,
Digital copies end up in no man's land on servers, and people forget where they are. So
so you're recommending a hard copy?
I don't know the answer, to be honest with you.
Should we just ask them what they want?
I mean,
Yeah,
Just ask chief and codes, one of each? And I'm not sure why we said depending upon the location of the BES, it must meet NFPA 855. The stuff I've seen, I read about NFPA 855 is kind of like a Bible on a lot of this stuff. You reference it in several places, but,
Well, I think the intent is to say that you might have a best being used by a solar farm.
Yeah.
engineering document must be signed and sealed, okay. Anything on I, who signs the plans?
Which one?
J, excuse me, I'm sorry.
No?
K, emergency operations plan, this is the one I think where they have to provide to the fire department code officer and town manager's office. Which I like that because it's obviously,
And that really is for the first responders,
yeah.
as well as,
The only other one I thought about is you get a sheriff one, but I'm not sure they care, or I'm sure they care, but they're probably not around long enough to, or around enough to worry about it.
This is a big one. K is a big one for two things. One is that it is requiring contact of somebody who will be available 24 hours a day. The second thing is that somebody needs to be able to get to the site within 2 hours.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah, so that's.
That's a tall order.
It's,
Well, it's a tall order, but they're the ones who need to kind of guide people, this thing's melting down or doing whatever
yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
doing.
Yeah, I'm just saying that this is a
And they will
new.
need to make the case to the planning board that they've got that set up.
Mhm.
And obviously, it's, the $175 million facility, it's to their best interest to have that.
Do we talk in here about training at all?
I think it does.
Okay, we're not there yet.
But K should also be part of the operation and maintenance plan. And at the end here, it says that a permanent copy shall be placed in an approved location, accessible by facility personnel, fire code officials, and emergency responders. So you've got that covered as well. I think the CEO should have a copy.
Well, up in this, like the second sentence, it says they have to give it to the local fire department. And what would you like that to say?
Oh, it includes local code enforcement. Got it. Okay. Okay.
Number 8, I may have skipped too far there, but that's a good one too.
Is there anything from K main paragraph down to 8? Saying this is what should be in the emergency dock plan. Okay, number 8, you had a question? or
No,
comment?
no question, just comment that it's a good one, big one too. It's pretty much saying that we need training. And they need to provide schedules and procedures for that training.
Yes. Any other comments? Yearly site inspection plan? I guess my comment is, who do they give it to? Should they provide one to the fire and codes?
Submitted to town.
Submitted to town, yeah, whatever the correct verbiage is there. And this is, I'm gonna jump in here, if nobody objects. The ESCO, we do not discuss the requirement for an ESCO, or did I miss that?
Talking about peer review escrow?
Peer review, yeah.
Okay, so that would be covered under the site plan review application.
So the site plan review application plus this is what covers,
Well, the site plan review application gets them before the planning board. The planning board then applies these standards to
Yes.
the review. So they would, under Article 8, they would be going through site plan review, they would have to put up a peer review escrow, and the select board could, in the fee schedule, make a different escrow requirement for these projects.
so our existing site plan review process tells them they have to provide the escrow
Correct.
amount.
Yep.
Okay, as long as it's there somewhere, okay.
I'm so sorry.
Ownership changes,
Yeah.
is that enough time? I mean, why 14 days? Is that enough time? I mean, they know it's gonna happen, but sometimes closings, happen and, I mean, I don't want to get rid of it, but is 14 enough?
I
Or
think it's
30?
important just for the safety reason,
Gotcha.
right?
But 14 days is,
Is enough time?
that's my question.
Yeah, it
Or-
should
Well,
be.
no, I'm sorry, is it?
It's
yeah.
too much time
No, I'm saying, is it enough time?
for the developer to get,
Get the stuff
it
to the
should
codes
be.
guy.
It should be, I think. 14 days
I think
is 2
14 days
weeks.
is Plenty.
They should have everything
Okay.
all together.
It says
you know.
within closing, so it doesn't say before closing, or within change of ownership, so it doesn't say before change of ownership. So the way I read that is, I buy it from you today, I've got 14
2 weeks to-
days to let.
Yeah, I
Alan
agree.
know.
And my question was, that enough time?
Yeah, I think that's
Reasonable
plenty of time.
Okay. Now we're into safety. Any kind, I guess, George, I'm kind of relying upon you. I know you've done a lot of work in all the ULs and
Yeah.
and NFPAs and all that other stuff. The only one that I think is missing is that, does NFPA, is it 855, should that be included here? I don't know that it matters, because
There's
we
so
mentioned,
many.
we've mentioned it a half dozen other times, so.
Well, we do say 4, certified under the applicable electrical, building, and fire
Works for
prevention
me.
codes. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
site access?
I've got a question actually for this safety thing. So the UL 1741, they're changing, right? As the technology changes, the standards are changed. You know, these guidelines are changing. So I guess it's, you know, how do I say this? If in a couple years a developer comes to us and says, actually, we're under UL 1900 now, it's better than 1741. There's not a concern there, right?
Well, usually I think what they would do is update 1741, wouldn't they?
Yeah,
This one I have no clue.
possibly, but do you see how UL 1642 is for lithium? 1741 is talking about inverters. There's like different ones for different things.
So we,
You could be right. I just know that there's multiple versions of, or not versions.
so we don't have anything
Pieces
for
of
sodium.
1741, so I'm just saying changes in general. There could be changes.
Right.
It is what it is, right? I know that this is standard language that other
Yeah.
ordinances are listing, so I think it's fine. It was just a question I had that I think.
And I'm anticipating you will have a peer reviewer on this that can look at those issues.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and they could be the ones like, oh, no, it should be this
You're gonna need
instead. Yeah. Okay.
Site access? I mean, were there any other on the ULs,
No, no.
site access? Battery energy storage systems, components. Seeing none on D, I think
We
repeats
repeat, yep.
L on the previous page.
Oh, and that has the copy to the, so we can do.
I don't think we needed both places, I mean,
I would leave it in the other in the previous section, I feel like.
actually,
I
So
think,
L is they have to give us a plan.
Right.
And then D in the next section is they have to do it.
do it.
you're right,
Yep.
thank you. So it does not repeat.
And that does require the submission to the town.
I see.
Okay, then moving on to 5.7.9, abandonment. Well, Stuart, thinking about it, I had a question. You say 90 days. What if, which is probably, you know, I don't know if that's enough. If there's a fire on the site and they can't restart for 120 days, do we make them decommission?
If there's a fire,
Yeah, what it says is when it ceases to operate consistently for more than 90 days. So there's some reason they have to shut down. And because of a fire or whatever it may be, and it's gonna take them more than 90 days to bring it back online, or if they're, I don't know, if they have to, 20 years from now, they have to change everything out, they shut it down. This says, hey, it's day 91, start decommissioning.
I think it depends on your definition of operate. Because if you're on site and you're repairing from a fire or you're replacing units,
It's not
you're-
abandoned.
Okay.
it's an operation. I mean, you're doing something at the site.
Makes, you convince me.
And this gives the town the authority to go and invoke the bond
Well, I think, I think there's a good reason to have it, is,
Yeah.
so somebody does get up and walk away, goes bankrupt and just leaves or whatever, the town, gives the town some power
And
to
part
do
of the
something.
short time frame is the safety issues.
Okay. Definitions.
So wait, back to that though. So what if the project, there's a problem and they had to pause it, or there's a hurricane, something happens? As
Again,
long,
if the town invokes the bond, they'll have to get permission to go on the property.
oh, no, I mean
Some
before
sort.
the bond is invoked. I mean just if there's a pause in operation of the
But
system.
what I'm saying is the remedy that happens if that day we do perceive that it's abandoned is to try to deal with the abandonment.
Yeah.
So there'll be communications going
Yeah.
between.
Yeah, but I think I like Mark's definition or comment, which is if for some reason they have to shut down, whatever
Yeah.
it may be, but they're there fixing the problem or doing whatever they're doing, then they're still operating it.
I see.
They may not be generating power, but they're
I see.
still
I see.
operating the abandonment. And I like his definition is they do nothing. They just
They walk.
drive, take the copper out of it and drive away. So I'm good with that.
Okay. That's cool. I got it.
Definitions. Is there any others that,
Do we have a timeline in here? Did I miss it? Is that it?
timeline?
Timeline for permit, what am I talking about? They have X amount of months to build this thing after.
Site plan review does that.
Okay, so we don't need to talk about any of that in here.
That's included in the basic.
Okay.
Okay, so George, I think have you captured all the
Yep.
comments from everybody? So the plan going forward is we will, George will make these changes, and then get it out in time for our next, I guess we need to vote on having a meeting on Tuesday, or can we just vote to continue this meeting?
Either way.
Because the next meeting, we did get one of the developers, not Solar or Best, but Deer Creek has finally got everything together. My thought on that is they missed the deadline for a January review. We would review them on the 5th, 6th, whatever, of February. So we can continue this. Can we continue it, given the fact we haven't given the okay to do public?
This is publicly advertised.
No, but I mean, if we said no public input, do we need to? For tonight, for all of the stuff we've worked on, we've said no public input. Should we
Okay, well, either way, maybe just schedule a special
close it?
meeting.
Okay, so is there anything else we need to discuss this evening? Because I think the other thing we need to do is vote on having a meeting on the 15th of January. 6:30 PM right here. George will make the corrections, get them out on the web, and we will do the next meeting. Where there will be, in my idea, is take public input on stuff, and then I know George's, we got an email today, and George has gotten some other stuff. And George, if you get as much of that to us ahead of time as possible, so that we can, we don't have to be trying to read it and find it and all that other kind of stuff.
Do we want to talk about the proposed plan before the meeting next week, before the select board meeting next week? The proposed sheet that shows solar and battery sizes
it's
and
the
things
next
like
item.
that?
You mean the table of uses? We can?
It's the next item on our agenda.
Great.
I'm gonna start following the damn agenda.
So did you schedule a January 15th meeting, or are you gonna hold off doing that decision?
Oh, sorry.
Let's vote we need a vote on having a new meeting on the 15th of January. I move that we have a meeting on the 15th of January, 6:30 PM here at the fire station, at which time we will continue our discussions, but also take public input, written or in person.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, raise your hand if you agree. And please let me know, we need a quorum, obviously, if there's some reason you can't come on the 15th. Okay, so then the last thing is the table of use, which I read this as what they've done is, and the attorney working with George, so they're gonna change the solar energy system uses under the table of land uses, so that large-scale solar energy projects require contract zoning. And then also all of the battery energy systems where it's applicable. So it's only, sticking with battery energy, is only applicable in the RRA. It's not resource protection, aquifer, RP, shore zoning, LP shore zoning. So that's covered. And then the solar energy, I like this because I know and the Conservation Commission has been working on how do we restrict this? Where do we restrict it to? This gives the town the ability to say, yeah, we really don't want you to go on John Talbot's farm. And, but we do want you to go on Allen's property. So it gives that control for solar, which right now, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have any, somebody come in and say, I want to put it on Talbot's property, and we don't really have, as long as they meet all the other standards, we can't say no.
Correct.
And so this gives the town the ability to negotiate, and still say no. They say, we're not gonna give you a contract because that's environmentally sensitive land, even though it's not RP at this point or whatever it may be.
So what that's doing is putting it to the town to vote, right?
Yes,
So
it's just,
saying, I don't like John, so
you
put
can-
it on his property, or don't put it on his property, but I do like Alan, so, no, I'm just, sorry, that wasn't good to say, but, just mean like it's very subjective, almost, right?
No,
No.
Because
No.
how
And
is,
that was probably throwing it off to talk about personal properties.
yes,
It really is gonna be based on the comprehensive plan.
it is exactly.
And
So
so
it's
the
no
comprehensive
different
plan
than,
talks about critical rural areas, which are fields over 50 acres, I think it is. And another, so those are all in the comprehensive plan to say where it should go and where it shouldn't go. And if it's, there may well be impacts on neighborhoods that would say, no, a Gorham scale project can't go here because there's a residential neighborhood right beside it.
and who's gonna be doing that analysis?
The select board and the planning board are gonna be reviewing the contract zoning.
Okay,
Yep.
So the same as for
Before it
this.
goes to town meeting. And if they need consultants to help with the analysis, they can do that.
okay,
so it's no different than Best,
okay.
the process.
For best, okay.
Yeah, the key thing I think here is you could have a differential. You could make it bigger for solar, more than one megawatt. That may be too small for solar. I think Kristen just took that as kind of the threshold for,
Yeah,
and then applied, just roped in the solar farms.
yeah. We'll be looking at our standards, though, our solar ordinance.
Yes,
Yeah, but I think that you should consider putting input into that one part of this. Not the contract zoning as a whole, but the threshold for
This-
solar farms versus
This-
BESS. Because they may need different thresholds.
What do you mean? You mean size?
Yeah,
Yeah, so in our solar ordinance, we talk about square feet. Remember when we all discussed this? And Kristen's recommending megawatts, which I had recommended talking about was megawatts. But in our ordinance, we talk about square feet. So 20,000 square feet is,
and I think the difference here is we're talking about limiting the scale of projects. We were just talking about what level of review they have to go through on that side.
which is similar, right?
Yeah, it is similar.
It is similar. So I'm trying to think in my brain, 20,000 square feet is what? How many acres is that?
That's a half an acre.
That's half an acre. So you can put,
Only have to go to site plan review for that.
so you can, I would recommend, if we're, trying to follow what we were talking about in the ordinance, you could argue that's a 2.5 megawatt project.
20,000 square feet.
You might be able to fit that in, possibly. So maybe, I would say maybe, I don't know what you all think, but 1 megawatt's very small. I'd be okay with a 2 megawatt
For solar.
for solar,
So,
yeah.
other thoughts?
And that would align with our ordinance. If we say 1 megawatt right now, and our ordinance is 20,000 square feet, it's a little, doesn't quite jive.
I guess my question would be, is there, in the solar ordinance, we break them into 3 categories. Do we do that by square footage of solar?
Square foot, remember?
Oh, yeah.
We talked about that?
I don't, that's why, yeah.
Okay.
So that, but that answers, so do we want to keep the same, so
This-
large scale has a meaning in the solar standards?
20,000 square feet.
Should-
and above.
Should we have,
Oh, I think we're talking about something a little bit different, in terms of the solar currently, it's really only what standards and process the planning board applies to the review of the project. Here, we're talking about saying you can't even review it if it's above 1 megawatt. You follow me?
Oh, yeah. I
So
am
contract
talking-
zoning is controlling, even proposing one of these systems.
no, I mean, I understand that, but I guess we've got 2 different, but it's solar is solar. So we have 2 different definitions for whether it be megawatts or acreage.
Thresholds.
Thresholds.
Yep.
So should we use the same definition for large scale that we use?
Yeah, actually,
We
I
gotta-
think
we
that'd
can
make
use-
it easier. That would, I like that idea.
So we could
But-
still make it, we could still say large scale and put
20,000 square feet.
Or have a separate number here, 40,000 square feet.
Oh, no, I mean,
So do you want to make a 1 acre solar farm have to go to a contract zone to town meeting vote?
no,
Okay.
no, that's what I'm saying. 20,000 square feet is larger than a megawatt, I think.
Right.
Is Kristen, remember when we had all talked about this between whether using megawatts or square feet? We decided to go with square feet, but Kristen's recommending megawatt. Did she have a concern?
I think that's because this is being driven by the BES, which doesn't have an acreage thing.
Okay,
I mean, I'm good either way, but I guess we have, when somebody's looking at our solar ordinance, there's definitions for small, medium, and large.
Right.
And so, but now we're, I guess what we're saying, it can be large, but if it's a large underneath a megawatt.
Yeah.
You
This
know,
is-
they
this
may
is
have
somewhat of
20,000.
a different scale for a different purpose. This is just triggering town meeting vote, as opposed to triggering, you gotta do site plan review, you gotta do conditional use review.
Okay, I guess I hear what you, I think, let me just talk through this in some of my
Yep.
mind. So somebody wants to do green with 600 acres. I don't know how many megawatts that was, but it's a boatload. So somebody comes in, he's gonna look at large scale. Somebody wants to do 2 megawatts, they're gonna say, okay, I gotta go through contract zoning. If somebody's gonna come in, I'm just gonna put in 0.5 megawatt, I don't have to do contract zoning, even though it may be on 20,000 square feet. And I'm okay with it.
I say because we just got this ordinance passed and we're talking square feet and we talk about medium scale and large scale projects in our ordinance, we need to follow our ordinance because we're gonna use those standards to review.
Standards review, this is, again, this just says contract zoning, or no
Yeah,
contract
I mean,
zoning.
it will get approved for 2 megawatts, for instance.
I don't know what you mean. I'm sorry. We say in here, medium scale and large scale.
Yep.
Those 2 definitions are in our ordinance that we just passed.
Do-
That says medium scale and large scale, and they have sizes attributed to them.
But the question is, if somebody, what was the threshold, 20,000 square feet for large scale? I
Yes.
don't remember.
Yes.
Surface area of 20,000 square feet.
Do we want them, so, do we want every 20,000 square foot project to go through contract zoning?
Are you saying it's too small? Do you think it's too small?
20,000 square
Yeah.
feet, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
I'm just saying,
okay,
I like George's idea,
of just saying a number.
yeah, saying
Okay,
a
get rid
megawatt
of
number.
medium scale and get rid of large scale. and just say a number.
Well, medium scale has to be there because they need to know what, you know, what the requirements are for me, if they're gonna do a medium scale project.
But I thought you said CZ isn't until,
It doesn't.
well, then why do we have it in here?
Because the table right now has that in it. And so
Right,
we have, if somebody wants to do a
Oh.
medium scale,
Yeah, the
this is what
underlying
you,
language is
Oh,
new.
whoa, I see what you're saying. This is existing and we're just adding in the CZ.
Yeah, we're adding the-
Okay.
so we're
we
just,
have to-
I'm okay with as it's, whether it's 1 megawatt's too small, should be 2 megawatts. I'm okay with the verbiage, just what's the right.
Yeah, I see.
capacity.
How about then, we have A is medium scale, B is large scale, and then C, 2 megawatts and larger or something? Can
I
we do
would,
that?
I think this just, CZ also required without a C. Leave it as B, and then where it says CZ, contract zoning also required. So if it's under a megawatt, as this is written, they don't need to contract zoning.
Correct.
Correct.
And then I'm okay
Right.
with that, but if it's greater than one, greater than or equal to, I'm not sure what that is, but greater than that or whatever the right number is.
I see.
2, 3.
So this is separate. This is separate than
Yes.
this, that
So
line. Okay,
if
I
it-
was confused. So yes. And then do we want to change that to 2?
I have no,
No.
I have no idea.
I don't personally think so, but I wasn't here for a lot of the discussion for,
Sizing.
solar. That was before I was on the board. In my head, I can't picture how many solar panels is 20,000 square feet. But I just did a quick Google search, and according to the internet, for a megawatt, you need 3,000 to 4,000 panels, and that's a lot.
Well, let's do this.
Juliet.
Yeah, can we ask people from the Conservation Commission or Select Board to speak up if they have something that could help us here?
Do you want to go to the
Can I
bathroom?
make a motion of that? or something? Could I?
Do you all have something I mean, you're sitting there whispering, do you have something you'd like to say?
So, 40,000 square feet, 43,000 square feet is 1 acre. 1 acre is a football field without the end zone, so if it gives you a visual, half an acre is 20,000 square feet roughly. The reason the square footage was utilized with the solar ordinance was because the thought process was, as technology improves, you shouldn't be punished, because if all of a sudden you can put a 5 megawatt project on half as much acreage because your panels are much more efficient, that shouldn't be a punishment. You should have a reward for keeping it compact. So that's why we went with the community went with square footage of panels as opposed by megawatt hours, understanding that it is a different approach, but that was due to the desire to keep the rural nature and impact small.
Thank you. I remember that now.
Okay,
And-
and
Michael and I lived and breathed the solar ordinance for like 12 months, so.
did a great job.
So we'll eliminate it.
So then the question is, since we've broken the cardinal rule, what should
I'll
be?
return the favor next week.
Thank
All
you,
right.
thank you, thank you.
I was gonna watch on television.
Text me, so.
What should be the right number? 1 megawatt, 2 megawatts?
And do we want to talk square feet still?
Yeah, I mean, roughly 10 acres is a megawatt, just to give you a ballpark. 5 to 10 acres is a megawatt, depending on,
Okay.
so.
That's a lot.
I don't know what
Yeah.
the right answer is.
Well, I mean, 10 acres is a lot.
big.
But we're talking
Yeah.
space, right? Like you were just saying, it's
Yes.
not really about the size, it's about the space.
Yes.
So,
I would,
I
that,
think generally the reason we have gone with space is also because it's more approachable for people to understand. If you're saying this community, do you want to approve a 4.6 megawatt development?
They can't relate.
No one knows what that means, but if you say, do you want to approve a 5 acre project,
Mhm.
which is roughly the size of 5 football fields, people can visualize that and then get a sense for it.
then I'm leaning to go back more towards the
square
square
feet.
footage.
And
Yeah, I
will say,
kinda-
think
I-
Kristen was aware that our solar ordinance went with square footage instead of megawatts, so I'm sure it's just a.
I like being consistent, right? And like with this explanation, this reminder, I would also vote with square foot. And then I mean, I guess I'm,
Well, these guys, the select board, are the ones that are gonna, correct me if I'm wrong, you're gonna take the lead on this table, or should we just finish up what we're doing?
I think it's gonna be a collaborative process, but we wanna hear your feedback, you know, so.
I'd go with square footage.
One question is whether or not the battery energy storage systems should have a threshold. Because right now, there is none, just says battery storage energy systems.
Well, didn't we say
contract
everything
zone.
above home use or something? The battery
So
system?
I don't wanna speak for the entire subboard without there being a vote, but my inclination was that the intent was for contract zoning to be applied once you left the residential use component. And so there was a little concern about what size you need for residential. Maybe you wanna have a discussion about residential and then light commercial, so if someone needs 4 batteries because they have a garage or something. But the intent was if this was a utility scale, if it was putting energy to the grid, it should go through, contract zoning as opposed to self-consumption.
And we do have a definition for tier 1, 2, and 3. And so is it tier, under, let's stick with the solar first. So what's the right
Size?
size?
First of all, I do
20,000
think,
square feet.
I think we should stick with square feet. What do you all
Okay.
think about that?
I think you should stick with square feet.
I do too.
Yeah, okay, great.
So we've decided to stick with that. What's the right square footage?
That's a good question.
And we don't need to decide this tonight because,
And I'll put this out there because we say a 20,000 square foot surface area for panels is our limit, is our threshold for a large scale.
yep,
So we're saying half an acre just in surface area for the panels. Once you include buffering and space
Oh, right,
between
'cause we're not
the
including the
rows and all
rows.
that, I mean, you're getting closer to an acre, if not bigger already.
well, here's, my thought is we have a definition for large scale
Right.
in solar. So our recommendation to the select board would be, we use that definition, which is 20,000 square feet.
So just go,
Just kind of what I was-
large scale is
20,000 square.
commercial zone.
Yeah, so,
So
Yeah.
anything above a half acre has to go to a town meeting?
I agree with you. It's a very small project, it's a very small project, but, you know,
so it doesn't, I mean, we could pick 40,000. I mean, we just use a square footage. So, you know, what's,
the way we are measuring these is different. Like, developers coming in here and saying 20,000 square feet, to me, it means the entire project is, like, if we looked at that picture, 20,000 square feet, including the rows, including the fence, including the transformers.
But it
That's
doesn't-
small,
but it
but
doesn't.
it
It's
doesn't.
just
The way we're
surface
talking
area.
about is actually we're compressing everything in. So
Ground
really,
mounted
it's
systems.
like 40,000 square feet, I think.
So you
Like a
can-
real project
You
size.
can use a different scale for this, the
Yeah.
contract zoning threshold. So maybe going back to what Joe was saying, think about it in terms of acres. Okay, Green just got hit with a proposal for a 500 acre solar farm. So maybe think about, you know, is 2 acres, where do you want to trigger a contract, townwide contract zoning vote? You know, 1 acre, 2 acres, 10
And when we
ac-
talk about
10
acres, we're talking about the entire project
Yeah,
area,
the
right?
entire
Yeah.
project, like the Gorham
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
project was 5
Yeah,
acres.
that would be easier to understand.
well, my thought is we're not gonna get there tonight. And we're not gonna get, you know, if we want it bad, we
Yep.
may get it bad tonight. So
No.
we can pick this up again next Wednesday.
Yeah, but be thinking about the
Yeah,
concept.
I like that idea.
And then, but going to battery energy storage systems, the way this reads, it could include a Tesla, you know, a car battery operation. So I
Should
guess I
consider
would,
a threshold.
what's that?
They should
I
consider
would put
threshold.
tier 1, tier 2, you know, however you wanna say that, tier, you know,
I
put
also-
tier.
I also like how someone mentioned is behind the meter or front of the meter, right? Terminology. Behind the meter is you are feeding something local.
I don't think it matters.
Could be commercial.
I don't, if it's gonna be a big battery energy storage system, it doesn't matter, you know, if it's here and the meter's here. and it's-
You're right. A behind the meter system could be big. It could be a big industry, we don't have any, but
But-
it could be. So if that's the concern, then that, I guess we couldn't go that route.
Yeah, I wouldn't
The
break it
size
out.
of the battery.
Size of the
concerning.
facility.
To be continued.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's what I'd like to, everybody think about is have a tier 1, tier 2 for battery energy systems, and let's come up with a and your help would be appreciated on,
And actually, can I just say one more thing
No.
about what George brought up? 20,000 square feet in general, I think if you're smushing the panels together, expanded is 40,000, right? That's about an acre. So we could still kind of follow along with this if we wanted by saying an acre. Or if we wanted to go even larger to 2 acres or something. But 1 acre could be about the same as the large scale definition, I think.
I think we just need to have the right, come up with a good answer for next week. And I'm not sure that I'm the guy that, you know, if you all would just come up with an idea, if you want to give us input or come into the meeting, whatever. So, having said that, we got an awful lot done today. Thank you very much for being here on a cold night and beating through this. We're gonna get public comment, including somebody's probably gonna tell us the right sizes. Where do we think we are on, in terms of getting this thing done and timing? I mean, can we get it done by the April, whatever, 5th,
When would
1st?
we need it by?
It would
March?
have to be done and to the select board. I think my thought would be tonight on whatever next 15th, we get public input, tweak that. George gives us yet another version on the February, whatever our meeting is on February 5th, we would come to grips with the final draft that we would submit to the select board.
Right.
So we would send it to them, they would act on it in one of their meetings. They send it back to us. We cannot have a formal public hearing, which would be our next step after we send it to them. We cannot have a formal public hearing until, I don't know, 5th of March, 7th.
30 days before the.
Yeah,
Fourth of
so
July.
5th of March, 7th of March. So if we can get there where we have our final draft voted on the 5th of February, I mean, I kind of think we can do that, but, so, and we can wait and see where we stand next week, but my thought would be, we use the 15th strictly for Bess, and then on the 5th of February, we do have a project, which hopefully will not take us, it's not a full project, so they're just asking for some waivers or stuff. Thoughts on that? And I don't need a decision tonight. I do need a motion to,
We kind of, we kind of need to bring this to town meeting this year, don't we?
yeah, and that, the schedule we just laid out takes it to town
So,
meeting.
it's almost like we have to.
Yes, if we want to do that.
What? All right, yeah, so you made a motion?
I second that motion.
Okay, we've had a motion and a second. All right,
Motion
if
to
you want to
adjourn.
leave,
Yeah.
raise your hand. We're done. Thank you. Turn your mics off. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming, guys.